In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a glamorous stranger, Eleanor Grayson, is found strangled in a dressmaker's shop, a tape measure knotted tightly around her throat, as whispers of jealousy, betrayal, and a mysterious art dealer swirl. Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of secrets. Was it her husband's rage, a lover's ambition, or a hidden truth that led to murder? In this chilling tale of love turned lethal, every stitch hides a clue, and only Miss Marple can tie the threads to justice. Chapter 1. The Dressmaker's Parlor. The summer sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, softening the edges of the cobblestone lanes and thatched cottages. From her lace-curtained window, Miss Jane Marple sat in her favourite armchair, her knitting needles moving with the steady rhythm of a metronome. A ball of soft blue wool rested in her lap, but her eyes, bright and inquisitive behind her spectacles, were fixed on the world beyond. The village was a tapestry of small dramas, and Miss Marple, with her unerring knack for observation, missed none of its threads. Across the lane, Mrs. Clara Henshaw's dressmaking shop stood as a modest beacon of elegance, its bow window displayed a cascade of fabrics, emerald velvets, creamy silks, and delicate muslins that drew the eye of every passer-by. Clara, a widow in her 40s, was a woman of precision, her nimble fingers capable of transforming a bolt of cloth into a gown that could rival those of London's finest ateliers. Her reputation had spread beyond the village, attracting clients from as far as Much Benham, and even the occasional city dweller seeking her bespoke creations. That morning, a sleek black motorcar had pulled up outside Clara's shop, an uncommon sight in St. Mary Mead's quiet streets. From it emerged Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, a woman whose arrival sent a ripple of curiosity through the village. Eleanor was a vision of modern elegance, her auburn hair swept beneath a cloached hat, her tailored coat accentuating a figure that spoke of wealth and confidence. Yet Miss Marple, watching from her vantage point, noted a subtle tension in Eleanor's movements, the way her gloved hand clutched her handbag a fraction too tightly, the quick glance she cast over her shoulder before entering the shop. A woman with a secret, Miss Marple murmured to herself, her needles pausing for the briefest moment. Inside the dressmaker's parlour, Clara greeted her new client with her usual warmth, though her sharp eyes missed little. Eleanor's request was for a gown of midnight blue satin, something suitable for a London gala. As Clara pinned and measured, Eleanor's conversation was polite but guarded, her answers to Clara's gentle inquiries about her life in the city clipped and vague. The fitting proceeded smoothly, with Clara's apprentice, Lily Bates, hovering nearby, her youthful face alight with admiration for the glamorous stranger. Miss Marple, resuming her knitting, might have thought no more of the scene had it not been for the scream that shattered the morning's tranquillity. It came from Clara's shop, high and piercing, cutting through the chatter of sparrows and the distant clatter of a milk cart. The village seemed to hold its breath. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her heart quickening not with fear but with the calm certainty that something significant had occurred. She rose, adjusted her shawl, and stepped outside just as Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, came rushing from the shop next door, her apron askew. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's dreadful." Mrs. Price gasped, her round face flushed. "It's Mrs. Grayson, she's dead. Strangled, they say, with a tape measure." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind already turning. She crossed the lane, her steps measured but purposeful, and entered the dressmaking parlour. The scene within was one of disarray. A mannequin had toppled, spilling a length of taffeta across the floor. Pins glittered in the sunlight streaming. through the window, and there, near the tall, fitting mirror, lay Eleanor Grayson. Her face, once vibrant, was now a mask of pallor, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Around her throat was a dressmaker's tape measure, its cloth surface taut and twisted into a cruel knot. Clara stood frozen, her hands clasped to her chest, her eyes wide with shock. Lily, trembling beside her, clutched a pair of shears as if, for protection. A small crowd had begun to gather at the door, their whispers a low hum of horror and fascination. Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, taking in every detail. The overturned chair, the half-unravelled spool of thread on the work table, and, glinting faintly beneath a fold of chiffon, a single pearl earring, its lustre marred by a speck of dust. Inspector Craddock's arrival brought a semblance of order. A young man with a methodical mind, he respected Miss Marple's insight, though he sometimes found her methods unorthodox. "A bad business, Miss Marple," he said, his notebook already open. "Mrs. Henshaw says she stepped into the back room for a moment fetching thread. She claims San came back to find this." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on the tape measure. It was no flimsy ribbon, but a sturdy tool, its edges reinforced, capable of holding fast under strain. The knot intrigued her most a complex, almost decorative twist that suggested not haste, but deliberation. "A curious choice of weapon," she remarked softly, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. "And a curious knot." As Craddock began questioning Clara, Miss Marple stepped closer to the body, her expression one of quiet sorrow. Eleanor Grayson had been a stranger to St. Mary Mead, yet her death had cast a shadow over the village's placid surface. Miss Marple's mind, sharp as the pins scattered across the floor, began to weave together the fragments of what she had seen: the nervous client, the solitary earring, the knot that spoke of intent. Somewhere, she knew, lay the thread that would unravel this mystery, and she would find it. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime, the dressmaker's parlor. So lately, a haven of silks and quiet industry had transformed into a tableau of tragedy. The summer light, filtering through the bow window, cast a harsh glow on the chaos within. Fabrics lay strewn like fallen leaves, crimson velvet draped over a chair, a length of ivory lace trailing across the floor, and a bolt of sapphire chiffon crumpled beneath an overturned mannequin. The air, once scented with lavender and starch, now carried a faint, metallic tang, a reminder of the violence that had shattered St. Mary Mead's tranquility. Miss Jane Marple stood just inside the doorway, her slight figure unobtrusive yet commanding, her eyes sweeping the room with the precision of a cartographer charting unfamiliar terrain. Inspector Craddock, his face set in a mask of professional grimness, directed to constables to secure the entrance. The crowd outside, swollen now with curious villagers, pressed against the shop's window, their murmurs a low hum of speculation. Craddock's presence brought order, but it was Miss Marple's quiet scrutiny that seemed to anchor the scene, as if her very gaze could coax the truth from the disordered remnants of Clara Henshaw's domain. Eleanor Grayson's body lay near, the tall fitting mirror, its ornate frame reflecting the grim spectacle in fractured glints. She was a study in contrasts. Her elegant coat, still buttoned, spoke of poise, while her face, drained of colour, bore the stark imprint of death. Around her throat, the tape measure tool, so mundane in Clara's skilled hands, had become an instrument of murder. Its cloth surface, reinforced with a subtle weave, was pulled taut, the ends knotted with a precision that struck Miss Marple as oddly deliberate. The knot itself was no simple loop, but a complex arrangement. its twists and turns suggesting a practiced hand, perhaps one accustomed to ropes or cords beyond the dressmaker's trade. Clara Henshaw stood to one side, her hands wringing a handkerchief into a tight knot of their own. Her face, usually composed, was a mask of shock, her dark eyes darting between the body and the inspector. Lily Bates, the young apprentice, hovered near her mistress, her cheeks streaked with tears, her hands clutching a pair of shears, as if they might ward off the horror before her. The shears trembled, catching the light in fleeting flashes, and Miss Marple noted the girl's pallor, the way her gaze avoided Eleanor's lifeless form. "Miss Marple," Craddock said, his voice low but firm, "I'd value your thoughts. This is a nasty business, and you've a way of seeing what others miss." Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression one of gentle sorrow. "A terrible thing, Inspector," she replied, her voice soft yet clear. "A life cut short in such a cruel manner. I shall look, if you think it helpful." She stepped forward, her movements unhurried, her eyes taking in every detail. The floor, polished wood beneath the scattered fabrics, bore faint scuff marks near the body, as if a struggle had occurred, though not a prolonged one. A small work table nearby held a pincushion, its needles glinting like tiny sentinels, and a spool of black thread partially unravelled, its end trailing toward the floor. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on a single pearl earring, half hidden beneath a fold of chiffon. Its mate was missing, and she wondered if it had been torn away in a moment of violence or left elsewhere. A silent witness to the crime, Craddock, meanwhile, was questioning Clara, his notebook open, his pencil moving swiftly. "Mrs. Henshaw," he said, "you say you left Mrs. Grayson alone for only a moment. Can you be precise about the time?" Clara's voice trembled, but she steadied herself. "It was just past 11, Inspector. Mrs. Grayson was trying on the bodice of her new gown. I needed a particular shade of thread navy to match the satin. The stock is kept in the back room, you see. I couldn't have been gone more than 2 minutes, 3 at most. When I returned, her voice broke, and she pressed the handkerchief to her lips. And you saw no one else in the shop?" Craddock pressed. "No one entered or left while you were with Mrs. Grayson?" "No one," Clara said firmly. "The bell above the door would have rung. It always does. And Lily was in the workroom, cutting patterns. She'd have heard it too." Lily nodded, her eyes wide. "I was in the back, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't hear the bell, nor any voices, only the scream." Miss Marple, listening, noted the girl's hesitation, the way her fingers tightened around the shears. Fear, she thought, or perhaps something more. She turned her attention to the tape measure, bending slightly to examine it without touching. The knot fascinated her, its intricacy suggested not only skill but intent, a deliberate act rather than a spur of the moment, frenzy. She recalled a sailor she'd once known in her youth, a man who could tie knots that held fast against the fiercest storms. This knot, she suspected, held a story of its own. "Inspector," she said, straightening, "have you noticed the knot? It's rather unusual, don't you think? Not the sort one might tie in haste." Craddock frowned, crouching beside the body. "You're right," he said, his tone thoughtful. "It's tight, precise, almost decorative, in a grim sort of way. Any thoughts on what it might tell us?" Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind turning. "It suggests familiarity," she said slowly. "Someone who knew how to handle such a tool, or perhaps something similar. A sailor, a craftsman even. A gardener might tie such a knot. And yet, It was done quickly, in the moment of the crime. That speaks of confidence, does it not? Craddock nodded, jotting a note. Confidence or desperation, he mused. Either way, it's a clue. We'll have the tape measure examined properly. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the pearl earring. Again, she stepped carefully over a length of lace and knelt, her movements surprisingly agile for her age. With a handkerchief, she lifted the earring, holding it to the light. The pearl was lustrous, its setting delicate gold, but a tiny scratch marred the clasp, as if it had been caught or pulled. This, she said, handing it to Craddock, may be significant. Mrs. Grayson wore such earrings, I believe. Where is its twin? Craddock took the earring, placing it in a small evidence bag. Good catch, Miss Marple. We'll search for the other. If it's here, it might tell us something about the struggle. Miss Marple rose, her eyes scanning the room anew. The fitting mirror, she noted, was angled slightly askew, as if bumped during the altercation. Its surface reflected the body, the scattered fabrics, and, faintly, the faces of those present. Clara's strained expression, Lily's tearful one, Craddock's focused intensity. She wondered what else the mirror had seen, what fleeting moment it had captured before the scream. Craddock turned to Lily, his tone gentle but firm. Miss Bates, you were in the workroom, you say. Did you hear anything at all before the scream? A voice, a footstep, anything out of the ordinary? Lily shook her head, her curls bouncing. Nothing, sir. I was cutting muslin for a blouse. The scissors make a soft sound, you know, and I was humming a bit. I didn't hear anything until Mrs. Henshaw screamed. I ran out and saw her. She gestured vaguely toward Eleanor's body, her voice faltering. Miss Marple watched the girl closely. Lily's distress was genuine, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a momentary glance toward Clara that suggested something unspoken, loyalty, perhaps, or fear of saying too much. Miss Marple filed the observation away, her mind already weaving a delicate web of possibilities. The constables, under Craddock's direction, began a methodical search of the shop. One lifted the fallen mannequin, revealing a small brass pin that had rolled beneath it. Another examined the back room, a cramped space filled with shelves of thread, fabric swatches, and a sewing machine. The bell above the door, Craddock confirmed, was in working order, its chime sharp and clear when tested. If someone had entered or left, it should have rung, lest, Miss Marple thought, the intruder knew how to silence it, or had entered by another means. She moved to the window, peering through the lace curtains at the street outside. The crowd had grown, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, was holding court, her voice carrying snippets of speculation, strangled with a tape measure, of all things. Who'd have thought it, in St. Mary? Mead. Miss Marple's lips twitched in a faint smile. The village, for all its charm, was no stranger to human nature's darker impulses. She had seen it before: envy, greed, passion, all simmering beneath the surface of tea parties and church bazaars. Turning back to the room, she noticed a small detail she'd overlooked: a single button, mother of pearl, lying near the base of the work table. It was too fine for the fabrics scattered about, its sheen matching the elegance of Eleanor's coat. Had it come loose in the struggle? She pointed it out to Craddock, who added it to the evidence bag with a nod. You've an eye for these things, Miss Marple, he said, a touch of admiration in his voice. Clara, recovering slightly, spoke up. Inspector, I can't think who would do this. Mrs. Grayson was, well, she was a private sort, but kind enough. She paid promptly, never haggled. I can't imagine anyone wishing her harm. Someone did, Craddock said bluntly, and they chose your shop to do it. We'll need to know everything about her visits here, Mrs. Henshaw. Every word, every detail. Clara nodded, her face pale. Of course. She came 3 times, always for fittings. She was particular about her gowns, wanted them just so. She mentioned a gala in London, something important. I thought her a bit nervous, perhaps, but I put it down to city ways. Miss Marple listened, her mind turning to Eleanor's demeanour. That morning, the clutched handbag, the quick glance over her shoulder. Nervousness, yes, but of what? A threat, a secret, or simply the weight of a life lived under scrutiny? She recalled the photograph in the Grayson cottage, Eleanor's ears adorned with pearl earrings, both present. The single earring here suggested a struggle, but its placement half hidden, as if dropped and overlooked hinted at haste or distraction. Craddock, concluding his initial questions, addressed Miss Marple. Any theories, Miss Marple? You've seen the scene now. What does it tell you? She hesitated, her eyes distant. It tells me, she said slowly, that this was no random act. The tape measure, the knot, the earring all speak of purpose. Someone knew Mrs. Grayson would be here, alone, for those few moments. Someone acted swiftly, with a weapon at hand, yet left behind traces of their presence. Passion, perhaps, but not without calculation. Craddock raised an eyebrow. Passion and calculation, he repeated. A dangerous combination, indeed. Miss Marple said, her voice soft, and one we shall unravel, Inspector, in time. As the constables prepared to remove the body, Miss Marple took one last look at the parlour. The mirror, the fabrics, the scattered pinzole were silent witnesses to a crime that had shaken St. Mary Mead to its core. She thought of her garden at home, where a single weed could choke a rose if left unchecked. Human nature, she knew, was much the same as single flaw. A moment of weakness could lead to ruin. With a quiet resolve, she stepped outside, the bell above the door chiming softly, a reminder that even in chaos, some things remained constant. The truth, she was certain, would not elude her for long. Chapter 3. The Graysons' Marriage. The afternoon sun dipped low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village green. The initial shock of Eleanor Grayson's murder had settled into a hum of subdued whispers, as if the very head conspired to share secrets. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted against the glare, walked with measured steps toward the vicarage, her mind as active as the bees buzzing in the lavender beds. The tragedy in Clara Henshaw's shop had stirred the village, but it was the undercurrents of human motive, jealousy, betrayal, fear that held Miss Marple's attention. She had seen such currents before, rippling beneath the surface of polite society, and she knew they often led to the heart of a crime at the vicarage. Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, was arranging roses in a crystal vase, her face a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, setting down her shears, "what a dreadful business. Poor Mrs. Grayson, to meet such an end, and in Clara's shop, of all places. Have you heard anything new?" Miss Marple settled into a chintz-covered chair, her knitting bag at her side. "Only what the village is saying," she replied, her tone mild, "which is rather a lot, I find. But you, my dear, always hear the most reliable tidbits. Tell me, what do you know of the Graysons?" Mrs. Clement's eyes gleamed with the delight of a woman who thrived on the gentle art of gossip. Well, she began, lowering her voice, they're newcomers, as you know. Rented Rose Cottage just 3 months ago. Mr. Grayson Harold, that is as a solicitor, works in London but comes back most evenings. A quiet man, very proper, though I've heard he's particular about his accounts. Mrs. Grayson now. She paused, glancing toward the open window, as if to ensure no one lingered outside. Eleanor was quite the contrast. So stylish, always. In the latest fashions. She'd go up to London often, sometimes staying overnight. There was talk, you know, of her being, well, not entirely devoted to her husband. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her face betraying nothing but polite interest. Talk of an admirer, perhaps. She prompted, her voice as gentle as the breeze stirring the curtains. Mrs. Clement nodded, leaning closer. Exactly, a Mr. Vincent Lyle, they say. An art dealer, very charming, with a flat in Mayfair. Mrs. Price saw them dining together at a hotel in London last month. She was visiting her sister, you see, and recognized Eleanor at once. And then there's the matter of Harold's temper. The postman mentioned hearing raised voices at Rose Cottage more than once. Jealousy, I shouldn't wonder. Jealousy, Miss Marple murmured, her eyes distant. A powerful force, and so often misdirected. But tell me, was there anything else about the Graysons? Their habits, their visitors? Mrs. Clement thought for a moment, her fingers absently smoothing the tablecloth. They kept to themselves, mostly. Eleanor would visit Clara's shop for her fittings, of course, and she'd sometimes stop at the tea room. Harold was rarely seen socially, though he'd nod politely if you passed him on the lane. Oh, but there was one odd thing, Mrs. Wicks. Who cleans for them? Said Eleanor had a locked box in her dressing room. Never let anyone near it, not even Harold. Mrs. Wicks thought it might hold letters, or perhaps jewellery. Miss Marple's needles paused, a faint line appearing between her brows. A locked box, she thought, could hold many things secrets. Most likely, and secrets were the currency of motive. She thanked Mrs. Clement and rose, her mind already turning to the next thread in the tapestry of Eleanor Grayson's life. Her destination was the police station, a modest brick building where Inspector Craddock was sifting through the morning's findings. He greeted her with a nod. His desk cluttered with reports and a small evidence bag containing the pearl earring and Mother Ruth pearl button. Miss Marple, he said, pushing a chair forward, you've a knack for turning up just when I need a fresh perspective. We've got statements from Clara and Lily, but they're thin on details. No one saw or heard anything, it seems, except that scream. Miss Marple settled into the chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. A curious silence, she remarked. A shop in the middle of the village, broad daylight, and yet no witnesses. It suggests either great stealth or great familiarity with the place. What of Mr. Grayson? Have you spoken to him? Craddock leaned back, his expression grim. I have, just an hour ago. He's shaken, naturally, but holding himself together. Says he was at his office in London all morning. All morning left, on the early train, around 8. His clerk confirms he was there by 9, working on some contracts. He claims he knew nothing of Eleanor's appointment at Clara's until we told him. But there's something about him, Miss Marple. He's too controlled, if you ask me. Like a man who's rehearsed his grief. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Control can mask many things, she said. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. Did he speak of his wife's habits? Her trips to London, her acquaintances? He was cagey about that, Craddock admitted, flipping open his notebook. Said Eleanor liked the city, enjoyed the shops and galleries. He didn't mention any friends by name, though he admitted she'd been spending more time away lately. When I pressed him, he got sharp, said it was her nature, nothing more. But I got the sense he was holding something back. We're checking. His movements, of course, but the train times make it tight. If he was in London at 9, he'd have had to move fast to get back here by 11. Miss Marple nodded, her mind picturing the timetable of the London train, its rhythm as familiar to her as her knitting patterns. A solicitor, she mused, is a man accustomed to precision. If he planned something, he'd account for every minute. But passion, Inspector, is rarely so tidy. What did he say of their marriage? Craddock sighed, rubbing his temple. He called it happy, but his eyes told a different story. Said they'd been married 10 years, no children, and that Eleanor had her own interests. I asked about arguments, and he brushed it off, said all couples have their moments. But there was a flicker when I mentioned London. I'd wager he suspected something, even if he won't say it outright. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Mrs. Clemens, gossiped the raised voices, the rumoured admirer. There is talk, she said carefully, of a Mr. Vincent Lyle, an art dealer, seen with Mrs. Grayson in London. It might be worth looking into his connection to her, and whether Mr. Grayson knew of it. Craddock's pencil paused, his interest piqued. Lyle, you say? That's new. I'll have my men check into him. If Grayson was jealous, it could explain a lot. But the knot, Miss Marple, that's what's nagging at me. It's not the sort of thing a solicitor would know, is it? More like something a sailor or a craftsman might tie. Indeed, Miss Marple agreed, her voice soft. But men of law often have hobbies, Inspector. Fishing, perhaps, or gardening. A knot can be learned in many ways, and jealousy can make a man resourceful. Have you searched the Grayson cottage yet? We're planning to, this afternoon, Craddock said. Grayson's given permission, though he wasn't happy about it. We'll look for anything that might shed light, letters, diaries, anything tying to this Lyle fellow or the murder itself. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Do look carefully, Inspector. A home holds many secrets, often in the smallest details. A locked box, for instance, or a letter tucked away. Craddock raised an eyebrow, but he made a note. You've been talking to the village, haven't you? I'll keep an eye out. Anything else you'd suggest? Only that you listen, Miss Marple said, rising. Not just to what is said, but to what is not. Mr. Grayson's silence may tell you more than his words. Leaving the station, Miss Marple decided to take a detour past Rose Cottage, the Graysons' temporary home. It stood at the edge of the village, a charming but unassuming place with climbing roses framing the door. The curtains were drawn, and the garden, though tidy, lacked the warmth of a truly loved home. She paused by the gate, her eyes scanning the windows. A flicker of movement caught her attention, a shadow passing behind the parlor curtain, too quick to identify. Harold Grayson, perhaps, or someone else. She made a mental note to mention it to Craddock. Her next stop was the tea room, a cosy establishment run by Miss Hartnell, whose sharp tongue and sharper ears made her a font of village intelligence. The room was abuzz with talk of the murder, and Miss Hartnell, pouring tea with practiced efficiency, beckoned Miss Marple to a corner table. You'll have heard, of course, she said, her voice low but eager. Strangled in Clara's shop. I always said Eleanor Grayson was trouble. Too much city in her, if you ask me. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression one of polite curiosity. Trouble, you say? In what way? Miss Hartnell leaned forward, her eyes glinting. She had a way about her, didn't she? Always looking over her shoulder, as if she expected someone to follow. And those trips to London, far too many for a married woman, if you ask me. I saw her once, at the station, with a man. Not her husband, mind you. Tall, well-dressed, with a smile that could charm the birds from the trees. I'd bet my best teapot that was Vincent Lyle. Miss Marple's needles, resting in her bag, seemed to itch for movement. And Mr. Grayson, she asked, did he ever speak of his wife's travels? Not to me, Miss Hartnell said, sniffing. But he'd come in here sometimes, looking like a man with the weight of the world on him. Once I heard him mutter something about London being no good. For her, I thought he meant the air, but now, well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Miss Marple nodded, her mind piecing together the fragments. Harold's suspicion, Eleanor's secrecy, the shadow of Vincent Lilet was a pattern, but an incomplete one. She thanked Miss Hartnell and left, her steps turning toward home as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resumed. The click of her needles was a counterpoint to her thoughts, which circled the Graysons' marriage like a hawk. Harold's controlled grief, Eleanor's locked box, the whispers of an admiral pointed to a union strained by mistrust. Yet the tape measure, the knot, the earring, these were the threads that would tie the motive to the act. She thought of her nephew Raymond, who once remarked that her mind was like a spider's web, catching every stray detail. And so it is, she murmured to her cat Tuppence, who blinked lazily from the hearth. But the web is not yet complete. As the evening deepened, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the next day. She would visit Clara's shop again, speak to Lily, perhaps even call on Harold Grayson. The village, with its quiet lanes and watchful eyes, held the answers. And she, with her unassuming air and relentless curiosity, would find them. The truth, she knew, was like a rose in her garden, beautiful, but often hidden among thorns. With a final click of her needles, she set her knitting aside, her resolve as firm as the stitches she had wrought. Chapter 4. The Village Whispers. The morning after Eleanor Grayson's murder dawned soft and misty, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and honeysuckle. St. Mary Mead, though shaken, resumed its quiet rhythms. Milk bottles clinked on doorsteps. The postman's bicycle whirred along the lanes, and the church bell tolled its steady call to matins. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, a current of unease ran through the village, as if the cobblestones themselves whispered of the crime in Clara Henshaw's shop. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped lightly over her shoulders, stepped out into the mist, her eyes as keen as ever, her mind sifting through the fragments of the tragedy like a jeweller sorting gems. She made her way to the post office, a small, ivy-clad building where Miss Weatherby presided with an air of benevolent tyranny. The post office was the heart of village gossip, a place where letters were stamped and secrets exchanged with equal efficiency. Miss Marple, under the pretense of mailing a parcel to her nephew Raymond, lingered at the counter, her ears attuned to the chatter around her. The room was abuzz with talk of the murder, and Miss Weatherby, her spectacles perched on her nose, was in her element, dispensing news with the precision of a telegraph. "It's a scandal, Miss Marple," she said, stamping a letter with unnecessary vigour, strangled with a tape measure. "I always said Clara's shop was too grand for St. Mary Mead. Attracts the wrong sort, doesn't it? That Mrs. Grayson, with her London air, she was bound to bring trouble." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, her hands adjusting. The parcel's string. Trouble does have a way of finding those who seek it, she remarked. But tell me, Miss Weatherby, what do the village folk make of it? I've heard whispers of a gentleman friend, perhaps someone seen with Mrs. Grayson. Miss Weatherby's eyes gleamed, and she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Oh, you've heard that, have you? Well, it's no secret now. Mrs. Price, she was at the baker's. Mind yous, says she saw a man with Mrs. Grayson in London last month. Not her husband, oh no. A tall fellow, handsome, with a city suit and a smile like a film star. Mrs. Price swears it was the same man she saw loitering near Clara's shop last week. Vincent Lyle, they're saying. An art dealer with more charm than's good for him. Miss Marple's expression remained placid, but her mind quickened. Vincent Lyle, the name that had surfaced in Mrs. Clement's parlor, now woven into the village's narrative. Loitering, you say? She prompted, her tone one of mild curiosity. Near the shop, that's rather bold for a man of his sort. Bold as brass, Miss Weatherby said, nodding. Mrs. Price saw him on the lane, Tuesday last, just after noon. He was standing by the oak tree, looking toward Clara's window. Didn't go in, mind you, just stood there, then walked off toward the station. She thought it odd at the time, but now, well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Indeed it does, Miss Marple said, her fingers pausing on the parcel. And what of Mr. Grayson? Has anyone seen him about since the tragedy? Miss Weatherby sniffed, her disapproval evident. He's kept to himself, shut up in that cottage. Though Mr. Gibbs, the postman, says he delivered a letter there yesterday, addressed to Mr. Grayson in a man's hand. No return address, but the postmark was London. Mr. Gibbs thought it peculiar, what with Mrs. Grayson barely cold. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, her thoughts turning to the burned letter she'd glimpsed in the Grayson cottage. Man's hand, a London postmark. Could it be Vincent Lyle's, or another player in this tangled drama? She thanked Miss Weatherby and stepped outside, the mist curling around her like a gossamer veil. The village was alive with whispers, and she intended to follow their trail. Her next stop was Clara's shop, which had reopened despite the shadow of the previous day. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered, and Clara, pinning a length of muslin to a mannequin, looked up with a strained smile. Miss Marple, she said, setting down her pins, it's kind of you to come. I'm trying to keep busy, you know. It helps. Of course, Miss Marple said, her voice warm with sympathy. A terrible shock for you, my dear. I thought I might see how you and Lily are faring, and perhaps, she added, her tone gently probing, hear a little more about Mrs. Grayson's visits. Clara gestured to a chair, and Miss Marple sat, her eyes taking in the shop's restored order. The fabrics had been neatly folded, the mannequin upright, the floor swept clean of pins, yet a faint tension lingered, as if the walls themselves remembered the scream. Clara, resuming her pinning, spoke in a low voice. Mrs. Grayson was a good client, she said. Always punctual, always clear about what she wanted. That blue satin gown she was so particular about the fit, said. It was for a special occasion. But she was guarded, you might say. Never chatted much, not like some. Miss Marple nodded, her hands folded in her lap. Guarded, she repeated. Did she seem anxious, perhaps, or mention anything unusual? Clara hesitated, her needle pausing mid-stitch. She did seem on edge, now that I think of it. Last week, when she came for her second fitting, she kept glancing at the window, as if expecting someone. And she checked her watch more than once, which I thought odd. She wasn't late, you see. I asked if all was well, and she just smiled and said it was nothing, just city nerves. City nerves, Miss Marple murmured, her mind picturing Eleanor's quick glance over her shoulder, the clutched handbag, and did she ever speak of her husband or anyone else? A friend, perhaps, in London? Clara shook her head, her expression troubled. Not really. She mentioned Mr. Grayson. Once, said he was busy with his work. But there was no warmth in it, if you know what I mean. As for friends, she never named anyone, though. She paused, her fingers tightening on the muslin. There was one thing. During her first visit, she dropped her handbag, and a card fell out. It had a name on it, Vincent Lyle, with an address in Mayfair. I handed it back, and she looked flustered. Tucked it away quick. Miss Marple's interest sharpened, though her face remained serene. A card, she said. How curious. Did you see her with anyone else during her visits? No one, Clara said firmly. She always came alone, and the bell would have rung if anyone entered while I was in the back. It's a mystery, Miss Marple, how it happened. I keep thinking if I'd stayed, if I hadn't gone for that thread. You mustn't blame yourself, Miss Marple said gently. The fault lies with the one who tied that tape measure. Tell me, where is Lily today? I'd like a word with her, if I may. Clara nodded toward the workroom. She's in the back, cutting patterns. The poor girl's been shaken, but she's a good worker, stays on task. Miss Marple rose and made her way to the workroom, a small, tidy space filled with the soft rustle of fabric and the faint hum of a sewing machine. Lily Bates, her fair hair tied back with a ribbon, was bent over a table, her scissors moving with careful precision. She looked up as Miss Marple entered, her eyes wide and wary. Miss Marple, she said, setting down the scissors, is there news about Mrs. Grayson? Not yet, my dear, Miss Marple said, settling onto a stool nearby. But I thought you might help me understand her a little better. You were here during her visits, weren't you? Did you notice anything about her manner, perhaps? Or anything, she said. Lily's hands fidgeted with a scrap of muslin, her gaze dropping to the table. She was kind, she said softly, always said thank you, which not all clients do, but she seemed frightened sometimes, like she was waiting for something to happen. Last time she was here, the day before. Before it happened, she kept checking her watch, and she asked me if the back door was locked. I thought it strange, but I showed her it was bolted. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, her mind seizing on the detail. The back door bolted, yet Eleanor had asked about it. Fear of an intruder or something else? That's very interesting, Lily, she said. Did she say why? She asked. Lily shook her head, her cheeks flushing. No, ma'am. She just nodded and went back to her fitting. I didn't think much of it then, but now, I wish I'd asked her. You did all you could, Miss Marple said, her voice soothing. And did you ever see anyone with her, or near the shop, who seemed out of place? Lily hesitated, her fingers twisting the muslin tighter. There was a man, she said at last, her voice barely audible. Last week, I saw him outside. Across the lane, he was tall, with dark hair and a nice coat. He didn't come in, just stood there, watching the shop. I told Mrs. Henshaw, and she said it was probably someone waiting for a train. But I saw him again, the day before Mrs. Grayson. The day before. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained calm. Watching the shop, she repeated. Did you see his face, clearly? Not really, Lily admitted. He was too far, and he had a hat on, pulled low. But he wasn't from the village. I'd have known him. I didn't tell the inspector. I didn't want to make trouble, and Mrs. Henshaw said it was nothing. Miss Marple patted the girl's hand, her touch light but reassuring. You've done right to tell me, Lily. Every detail helps, even the smallest. You mustn't worry about trouble. The truth is never trouble, in the end. Leaving the workroom, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of new threads. Vincent Lyle, seen near the shop, his card in Eleanor's bag, her fear of the back door, pointed to a life shadowed by something or someone. But the village whispers, vivid as they were, lacked clarity. Was Lyle a lover, a threat, or merely a bystander caught in the net of gossip? And what of Harold Grayson, his silence heavy with unspoken suspicions? She decided to visit the station, where Inspector Craddock was likely poring over his notes. The police station was quiet, save for the scratch of a constable's pen and the distant clatter of a typewriter. Craddock, looking weary but determined, welcomed her with a nod. "Miss Marple," he said, pushing aside a stack of papers, "you've been out and about, I'll wager. Any new insights?" "A few," she said, settling into a chair. "The village is full of talk, as you'd expect. There's mention of a Vincent Lyle, seen near Clara's shop last week. And Lily Bates, the apprentice, says Mrs. Grayson was anxious, even asked about the back door being locked. It suggests she feared someone, Inspector." Craddock's pencil moved swiftly, his interest piqued. "Lyle again," he said. "We're looking into him. Got a telegram from London saying he's known in art circles, bit of a charmer. As for the back door, that's new. I'll have it checked for signs of tampering, though Clara swears it was bolted." "Anything else?" Miss Marple hesitated, choosing her words with care. "Only a letter," she said. "Delivered to Mr. Grayson yesterday, in a man's hand, postmarked London. It may be nothing, but in light of everything." Craddock nodded, jotting a note. "We searched the cottage this morning. Found nothing obvious, no letters, no locked box, though Grayson was cagey about his wife's things. We did find a fishing rod in the shed, which got me thinking about that knot. He says he used to fish years ago. Could mean something or nothing." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind picturing the intricate knot around Eleanor's throat. A fish knot, perhaps, learned in youth and recalled in a moment of rage. "It's worth considering," she said. "A man's hobbies often reveal his habits, Inspector, and his habits may reveal his heart." As she left the station, the mist had lifted, leaving the village bathed in soft sunlight. Miss Marple's thoughts were a delicate web, each whisper a thread connecting Eleanor's fear, Lyle's presence, and Harold's silence. She recalled a young couple in her youth, their love undone by suspicion, and how a single misunderstanding had led to tragedy. Human nature, she knew, was a constant, whether in St. Mary, Mead, or London's glittering salons. With a quiet resolve, she turned toward home, her steps light but purposeful. The whispers of the village were guiding her, and she would follow them as surely as a needle follows thread, until the pattern of the crime was clear. Chapter 5. A visit to the cottage, the second day after Eleanor Grayson's murder, broke with a sky of unblemished blue, the kind that promised warmth but carried a whisper of autumn's approach. St. Mary Mead stirred gently, its routines resuming. With the dogged resilience of a village accustomed to weathering small scandals. Yet the shadow of the dressmaker's parlor lingered, and Miss Jane Marple, stepping out from her cottage with a basket over her arm, felt the weight of unanswered questions. Her destination was Rose Cottage, the temporary home of the Graysons, where she hoped to glean insight into the fractured marriage that seemed at the heart of the tragedy. Her steps were unhurried, her straw hat shielding her eyes, but her mind was as sharp as the secateurs in her garden shed, cutting through the tangle of village gossip to the roots beneath. Rose Cottage stood at the village's edge, its whitewashed walls half hidden by climbing roses that spilled over the fence in a riot of pink and cream. It was a pretty place, but its charm felt superficial, like a stage set for a play no one believed in. The garden was neat but impersonal, the flower beds trimmed with military precision, lacking the joyful chaos of a truly loved plot. Miss Marple paused at the gate, her eyes scanning the windows. The curtains were partially drawn, giving the cottage a shuttered, secretive air. She noted a faint scuff on the gatepost, fresh enough to suggest recent passage, and wondered if it marked Harold Grayson's comings and goings, someone else's. She knocked softly, the sound echoing in the morning stillness. After a moment, the door opened to reveal Harold Grayson, his face pale and drawn, his suit impeccable but his tie slightly askew, small rebellion against his usual fastidiousness. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice polite but strained. "This is unexpected. Please, come in." Miss Marple stepped into the parlor, her senses alert. The room was tidy, with polished furniture and a faint scent of lavender polish, but it lacked warmth. A single photograph adorned the mantelpiece. Eleanor, her auburn hair swept up, her ears adorned with pearl earrings, smiling with a radiance that seemed at odds with the villagers' whispers. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the earrings, recalling the single one found in Clara's shop, its clasp scratched as if torn away. "A lovely photograph," she remarked, settling into a chair Harold indicated. "Your wife was a beautiful woman." Harold's jaw tightened, and he nodded, pouring tea from a pot that sat ready on a tray. "She was," he said, his voice clipped. "It's kind of you to call, Miss Marple, but I'm not sure what I can offer. The police have been here, turned the place upside down. I've told them all I know." Miss Marple accepted a cup, her hands steady, her eyes gentle but searching. "I'm sure you have, Mr. Grayson," she said. "But sometimes, in the shock of such a loss, small details slip the mind. I thought, perhaps, you might share a little about Eleanor, her habits, her joys. It helps, sometimes, to speak of those we've lost." Harold sat opposite her, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Eleanor was lively," he said, choosing his words with care. "She loved beauty art, music, fine clothes. That's why she went to Clara's shop so often. She had a gala coming up in London. She was particular about her gown." He paused, his eyes flickering to the photograph. "She was fond of those earrings too, wore them always. I don't know why one was found there." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of quiet sympathy. "It's curious, isn't it?" she said. "Such a personal item left behind. Did she ever misplace them, or perhaps lend them to someone?" "Never," Harold said sharply, then softened his tone. "They were a gift from me early in our marriage. She cherished them. If one was lost, she'd have been frantic." His voice faltered, and he looked away, his fingers tightening on the chair. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning to the earring's twin, still unaccounted for. She glanced around the parlor, noting the absence of personal touches, no books. Left open, No needlework in progress, none of the small clutter that marks a lived-in home. Her eyes fell on the fireplace, where a faint trace of ash lingered in the grate. She recalled the half-burned letter she'd glimpsed on her earlier visit, its edges charred, the initials VL just visible. "You've kept the place very tidy," she remarked. "It must be a comfort in such times to have order." Harold's gaze followed hers to the fireplace, and a flicker of unease crossed his face. "I try," he said. "Eleanor was less careful, always leaving papers about. I tidied up after the police left." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her thoughts weaving a delicate thread. Papers, tidied away, perhaps burned, to conceal the truth. She set down her cup, her voice gentle but probing. "It's natural to want to protect her memory," she said. "She spent much time in London, I understand. Did she have friends there, people she trusted?" Harold's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. "She had acquaintances," he said, "gallery owners, dressmakers, the sort she met at her events. She didn't need my approval for her friendships. But she was my wife, Miss Marple. Whatever the village says, she was loyal." Miss Marple inclined her head, her face serene. "Of course," she said, "village talk can be unkind. There's mention of a Mr. Vincent Lyle, an art dealer. Did she ever speak of him?" Harold's knuckles whitened, and for a moment she thought he might rise. "Lyle," he said, his voice low and bitter. "I know the name. She mentioned him once, said he'd helped her choose a painting. I didn't think much of it, but then I found his card in her bag weeks ago. She laughed it off, said it was business. I believed her." He paused, his eyes distant. "Perhaps I shouldn't have." Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the tremor in his hands, the way his gaze avoided hers. Jealousy, she thought, was a slow poison, corroding trust until it shattered. "It's hard," she said softly, "to know what lies behind a smile. But you loved her, Mr. Grayson. That much is clear." Harold's shoulders sagged, and he rubbed his temple, as if to banish a headache. "I did," he said. "More than she knew, perhaps. But love doesn't stop questions, does it? Or doubts?" Miss Marple rose, her basket in hand, her eyes lingering on the fireplace. "No," she agreed, "but it can lead us to the truth, if we follow it carefully. Thank you, Mr. Grayson, for your time. I shan't trouble you further." As she stepped outside, the sun warmed her face, but her thoughts were cool and precise. Harold's words, his silences, the burned letter all pointed to a man consumed by suspicion, yet his grief seemed genuine. She recalled a young man in her village, years ago, whose jealousy had driven him to rash words, but not to violence. Harold, she suspected, was differenter, man of control, until control failed him. Her next move was to seek out Lily Bates, whose hesitant confidences in the workroom had hinted at more to tell. Miss Marple found her in the churchyard, laying flowers on her mother's grave, her fair hair catching the sunlight. Lily looked up, startled, then smiled shyly. "Miss Marple," she said, brushing dirt from her hands, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I often walk this way," Miss Marple said, her tone warm. "It's peaceful, isn't it? But I confess, Lily, I hoped to find you. I've been thinking about what you told me about Mrs. Grayson and the back door. It's stayed with me, that detail. Did she say anything else? Anything that struck you as odd?" Lily's eyes darted to the gravestone, her fingers twisting a daisy stem. "I've been thinking about it too," she admitted. "There was something, that last day," She was trying on the bodice, and Mrs. Henshaw was pinning it. Mrs. Grayson looked in the mirror and said, "It's perfect. But it won't matter if I'm not there to wear it." I thought she meant the gala, but her voice was so quiet, almost sad. I didn't know what to make of it. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained calm. "A strange thing to say," she murmured, almost as if she feared something. "Did you notice anything else about her, Lily? Her bag, perhaps, or something she carried?" Lily frowned, her brow furrowing. Her bag was on the table, like always, but when she left, she checked it twice, like she was making sure something was there. "A letter, maybe, or that card I told you about." I didn't see it clearly, but she was careful with it. Miss Marple nodded, her mind picturing Eleanor's guarded movements, the card with Vincent Lyle's name. "You've a good eye, Lily," she said, "and a good heart to notice such things. If you remember anything else, you'll tell me, won't you?" Lily nodded, her cheeks flushing. "I will, Miss Marple. I want to help, if I can. It's awful, what happened." Miss Marple patted her arm and turned toward the village, her thoughts a delicate web of connections. Eleanor's fear, Harold's jealousy, the letter and the great hall were threads, but the pattern remained elusive. She decided to visit Inspector Craddock, to share her findings and hear his progress. The police station was busy, with constables sorting reports and a telephone ringing insistently. Craddock, looking harried, waved her to a chair. "Miss Marple," he said, "you're a welcome sight. This case is like chasing shadows. We've got nothing new from the shop, no fingerprints, no signs on the back door. But we did find something at the cottage." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her voice remained mild. "Oh, do tell, Inspector." Craddock pulled a small evidence bag from his desk, containing a fragment of paper, its edges charred. "This was in the fireplace," he said. "Grayson must have missed it when he cleaned up. It's part of a letter addressed to Eleanor. The handwriting's a man's, and there's a partial signature V. L. We're sending it to London for analysis, but it's a start." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her thoughts racing. "VL," she said. "Vincent Lyle, perhaps. It matches what I've heard." And Mr. Grayson's reaction when I mentioned Lyle was telling. He's a man with doubts, Inspector, and doubts can be dangerous. Craddock nodded, jotting a note. "We're tracking Lyle down. He's in London, according to his office, but he's been cagey about his movements. As for Grayson, his alibi holds for now. He was in London till noon. His clerk swears to it. But I don't trust him, Miss Marple. He's too smooth, too careful." "Careful men," Miss Marple said softly, "are often the most troubled. Look to his past, Inspector. His hobbies, his skills. The knot, you see, is still the key." As she left the station, the village was settling into its afternoon lull, the tea-room's windows glowing with lamplight. Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of details, the earring, the letter, Eleanor's cryptic words. She thought of her garden, where a single rose could hide a thorn that pricked the unwary. Human nature, she knew, was much the same a surface of beauty, a core of pain. With a quiet resolve, she walked home, her basket swinging lightly, her thoughts already turning to the next thread in the web. The cottage had given her glimpses, but the truth, she was certain, lay just beyond her. Grasp, waiting to be teased out like a knot in fine silk. Chapter 6. The art dealer's alibi. The third day following. Eleanor Grayson's murder dawned with a restless energy in St. Mary Mead, as if the village itself chafed under the unresolved weight of the crime. A light drizzle fell, misting the cobblestones and lending a silvery sheen to the thatched roofs. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the weather, donned her mackintosh and set out with her umbrella, her steps purposeful yet unhurried. Her mind, ever agile, was fixed on Vincent Lyle, the art dealer whose name wove through the village's whispers like a silken thread through coarse cloth. His connection to Eleanor, however tenuous, demanded scrutiny, and Miss Marple intended to observe the man herself, for she knew that truth often revealed itself in the smallest gestures, glance, a pause, a too careful word. Inspector Craddock had summoned Lyle to St. Mary Mead for questioning, a development that had set tongues wagging from the post office to the tea room. Miss Marple learned of his arrival through Mrs. Price, who had spotted a sleek motor car parked outside the police station. Its driver, a tall, impeccably dressed man with an air of urban polish. "That's him, mark my words," Mrs. Price had confided at the baker's, her voice brimming with conviction. Vincent Lyle, come to answer for his part in this dreadful business. Miss Marple, purchasing a loaf of rye, had listened with her usual quiet attention. Filing away the detail of Lyle's confident demeanour, she made her way to the police station, where Craddock was preparing for the interview. The station was a hive of activity, with constables sorting telegrams from London and a clerk typing furiously. Craddock, looking more energized than the previous day, greeted her with a nod. "Miss Marple," he said, pulling out a chair, "you're just in time. Lyle's here, and I'm about to have a word with him. Care to sit in? Your eye for detail might catch something I miss." Miss Marple settled into the chair, her umbrella propped beside her. "I'd be glad to, Inspector," she said, her voice mild but her eyes bright with interest. "A man like Mr. Lyle, I imagine, is accustomed to shaping his own narrative. It will be instructive to hear how he tells it." Craddock led her to a small interview room, its walls bare save for a map of the county and a ticking clock. Vincent Lyle was already seated, his posture relaxed, one leg crossed over the other. He was a man in his late 30s, with dark hair swept back, a neatly trimmed moustache, and eyes that held a glint of amusement, as if he found the proceedings faintly diverting. His suit, charcoal with a subtle pinstripe, spoke of wealth and taste, and a gold watch chain gleamed at his waist. Miss Marple noted the faint scent of cologne, expensive but understated, and the way his fingers drummed lightly on the table, a rhythm too controlled to be nervous. "Mr. Lyle," Craddock began, his notebook open, "thank you for coming. We're investigating the murder of Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, and your name has come up in connection with her. Can you tell us about your relationship with her?" Lyle's smile was smooth, his voice carrying the polished cadence of a man accustomed to galleries and drawing rooms. "Relationship is rather a strong word, Inspector," he said. "Mrs. Grayson was a client, nothing more. She had an interest in art modern pieces, mostly with a taste for the avant-garde. We met a few times in London, at my gallery or over lunch, to discuss potential acquisitions. She was charming, discerning, but our interactions were strictly professional." Miss Marple watched him closely, her hands folded in her lap. His words were measured, his tone almost rehearsed. Yet there was a flicker in his eyes when he mentioned Eleanor's name, a shadow that belied his casual air. She thought of a young man she'd known in her youth, a charmer who could talk his way out of any scrape, but whose eyes always betrayed his unease. Lyle, she suspected, was cut from similar cloth. Craddock leaned forward, his pencil poised. Professional. You say yet you were seen with her outside a hotel in London last month, dining together, and your card was found in her possession. That suggests a closer acquaintance, Wouldn't you agree? Lyle's smile didn't waver, but his fingers paused their drumming. Dining, yes, he said. A business lunch, Inspector. As for the card, I give them out free lits. How one builds a clientele. Mrs. Grayson was considering a purchase, a small Matisse sketch. We discussed it over lunch, nothing more. I'm hardly the only dealer she consulted. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her mind turning to the card Clara had seen, tucked away with such care. And did she purchase the sketch, Mr. Lyle? She asked, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the room like a needle through. Silk, Lyle's gaze flicked to her, a momentary surprise crossing his face before he recovered. No, Miss Marple, is it? She didn't. She said she needed time to decide. I hadn't heard from her since, until this tragedy. Craddock pressed on, his tone firm. Where were you on the morning of the murder, Mr. Lyle? Let's say between 10 and noon. Lyle leaned back, his smile returning. In London, Inspector. I had a lunch appointment at the Savoy with a gallery owner, Mr. Reginald Holt. We met at 11, discussed a potential exhibition. I was there until well past 1. Holt can confirm it, as can the waiter who served us. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, though her expression remained serene. The alibi was tidy, almost too tidy, and she recalled a case in her village years ago, where a man's perfect alibi had unraveled under the weight of a single inconsistency. A pleasant lunch, I'm sure, she said, and before 11. Mr. Lyle, where were you then? Lyle's smile tightened, just for a moment. At my flat, preparing for the day. I live alone, so I'm afraid there's no one to vouch for me there. But I took a taxi to the Savoy around 10:30. The driver might remember me, if you care to check. Craddock jotted a note, his face unreadable. We will, he said. And did you ever visit St. Mary Mead, Mr. Lyle? Perhaps to meet Mrs. Grayson here? Lyle shook his head, his expression one of mild surprise. Never, he said. I'm a city man, Inspector. Village life isn't my style. If Mrs. Grayson wanted to meet, she came to London, which she did several times. Miss Marple's thoughts quickened, her mind circling the village whispers Lyle seen near Clara's shop, watching from the lane. His denial was firm, but his eyes, when he spoke of St. Mary Mead, held a flicker of calculation. She thought of the knot around Eleanor's throat, its intricate twists suggesting a hand skilled in more than art deals. You're fond of sailing, I believe, she said, her voice almost conversational. A hobby, perhaps, from your younger days. Lyle's brow lifted, a spark of amusement in his eyes. Well, you've done your homework, Miss Marple. He said, yes, I sailed in my youth competitively, for a time. Gave it up years ago, though. Too much time on the water, not enough in the galleries. Why do you ask? Miss Marple smiled, her hands still folded. Oh, just a passing thought. She said, sailing teaches one such interesting skills, doesn't it? Knots, for instance. They stay with you, I imagine, even after the sea is left behind. Lyle's smile held, but his fingers resumed their drumming, a touch faster now. I suppose so, he said, but I'm not sure what knots have to do with art or with poor. Mrs. Grayson, Craddock, catching Miss Marple's drift, leaned forward. Let's talk about Mrs. Grayson's husband, he said. Did you ever meet Harold Grayson, or hear her speak of him? Lyle shook his head, his expression neutral. Never met him, he said. She mentioned him once or twice, said he was a solicitor, kept busy with his work. She didn't say much else. I got the impression they led separate lives, but that's hardly unusual among my clients. Miss Marple watched him, her mind picturing the burned letter in the Grayson cottage, the initials VL scrawled in a man's hand. Lyle's denial of any deeper connection with Eleanor felt polished, like a painting restored to hide its cracks. She recalled a young woman in her village, years ago, whose charm had masked a web of deceit, and wondered if Lyle's urban sophistication concealed a similar truth. Craddock closed his notebook, his tone brisk. "That'll be all for now, Mr. Lyle. Don't leave the area without informing us. We may have more questions." Lyle rose, smoothing his jacket. "Of course, Inspector," he said. "I'm at the inn, if you need me. A charming place, if a bit rustic." He nodded to Miss Marple, his smile lingering. "A pleasure, Miss Marple. You've a sharp mind, I'll wager. You keep the village on its toes." Miss Marple inclined her head, her eyes meeting his with quiet intensity. "I do my best, Mr. Lyle," she said, "and I find that truth, like a good painting, reveals itself with time." As Lyle left, Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. "What do you make of him?" he asked. "He's slick, I'll give him that. But that alibi's solid, if Holt confirms it." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her thoughts a delicate web. "Solid, perhaps," she said, "but even solid things can have cracks, Inspector. His manner is too smooth, his answers too ready. And that flicker in his eyes when I mentioned sailing it suggests he's guarding something. I'd look closely at that lunch and at his movements before it. A taxi driver's memory can be surprisingly unreliable." Craddock nodded, jotting a note. "I'll send a man to London to check with Holt and the cab company, and that's sailing bit clever of you to bring it up. That knot's still the odd piece in this puzzle. Lyle's got the hands for it, I'd wager, but no motive we can pin down yet." Miss Marple rose, her umbrella in hand. "Motive," she said softly, "is often the last piece to fall into place. But it's there, Inspector, in the shadows of his words. I'd also suggest asking Mr. Grayson about Lyle's card. His reaction may tell us more than Lyle's denials." Leaving the station, Miss Marple decided to call on Clara Henshaw, whose shop remained a focal point of the mystery. The drizzle had eased, leaving the air fresh and the lanes glistening. Clara was at her work table, stitching a hem with mechanical precision, her face pale but composed. "Miss Marple," she said, looking up, "it's good to see you. The shop feels different now, but I can't stop working. It's all I have." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her basket at her side. "You're very brave, my dear," she said. "I've just come from seeing Mr. Lyle, the art dealer. His name keeps surfacing, doesn't it? I wonder, did Mrs. Grayson ever mention him to you beyond that card?" Clara's needle paused, her eyes flickering with unease. "Not directly," she said, "but that last day when she was here, she got a telephone call just before her fitting. I answered it as she was in the changing room. It was a man's voice, said he was calling for Mr. Lyle. I passed the message, and she took the call in the back. She was quick about it, but when she came out, she looked unsettled. Said it was nothing, just a business matter." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. "A telephone call," she murmured. "How curious. Did you hear anything of what she said?" Clara shook her head, resuming her stitching. "Only a few words. She said something about not now, and it's too risky. I didn't think much of it then, but now. I wish I'd listened closer." Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch light but reassuring. You've helped more than you know, Clara. Every detail is a stitch in the pattern. If you remember anything else, you'll tell me, won't you? Clara nodded, her eyes grateful. I will, Miss Marple. I just want this to be over. As Miss Marple left the shop, the village was settling into its midday hush, the tea room's windows steaming with the promise of scones. Her thoughts were a whirl of new connections, the telephone call, Lyle's alibi, the knot that linked the crime to a skill he possessed. She recalled a case in her youth, where a man's charm had masked his guilt until a single slipper forgotten. Detail had undone him. Lyle, she suspected, was teetering on such an edge. She decided to walk past the inn where Lyle was staying to observe his movements. The inn, a rambling building with ivy-clad walls, was quiet, its parlor empty save for a maid polishing the bar. Through the window, Miss Marple glimpsed Lyle in the lounge, reading a newspaper, his posture relaxed but his eyes scanning the room with subtle vigilance. She noted a small notebook on the table beside him, its cover embossed with a gold initial V. A man who kept notes, she thought, was a man with plans. Returning home, Miss Marple settled by her fire, her knitting resumed. The click of her needles was a counterpoint to her thoughts, which circled Lyle's polished exterior and the cracks beneath. She thought of her garden, where a rose's beauty could hide a thorn that drew blood. Human nature, she knew, was much the same, a surface of charm, a core of secrets. With a quiet resolve, she set her knitting aside, her mind already weaving the next thread in the web. Lyle's alibi, she was certain, would not hold forever, and when it cracked, the truth would spill out like light through a broken pane. Chapter 7. Clara's Secret. The fourth day after Eleanor Grayson's murder brought a crisp clarity to St. Mary Mead, the drizzle of the previous day giving way to a sky of untroubled blue. The village, though still abuzz with speculation, had begun to settle into a wary routine, its inhabitants glancing over their shoulders as they went about their chores. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, stepped out into the morning light, her mind a delicate lattice of clues and suspicions. The threads of the case, Vincent Lyle's polished alibi, Harold Grayson's guarded grief. The intricate knot around Eleanor's throat had woven a complex pattern, but Miss Marple sensed a new thread waiting to be tugged. Clara Hent, the dressmaker, had been at the heart of the tragedy's stage, and Miss Marple suspected her quiet demeanor concealed more than shock. She made her way to Clara's shop, the bell above the door chiming softly as she entered. The parlor, restored to its orderly elegance, gleamed with the soft luster of polished wood and neatly folded fabrics. Clara was at her work table, her nimble fingers guiding a needle through a length of dove-grey serge, her face pale but composed. Yet Miss Marple noted a subtle tremor in her hands, a faint crease of worry between her brows that had not been there before. The shop, for all its tidiness, seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next disruption. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair with her usual unassuming grace. "You've done wonders to bring the shop back to order. It can't have been easy after such a shock." Clara set down her needle, her smile strained but genuine. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I've had to keep busy. It's the only way to keep my mind from dwelling. But it's not the same, you know. Every time I pick up a tape measure, I see her face." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes warm with sympathy. "A natural response, my dear. Such a tragedy leaves its mark. I've been thinking of you, and of poor Mrs. Grayson. You knew her better than most, through her fittings. I wonder, did she ever share anything with you perhaps? A worry or a confidence that might shed light on what happened? Clara's fingers tightened on the serge, her gaze dropping to the table. I've told the inspector all I know, she said, her voice low. Mrs. Grayson was private, not one for chatter. She spoke of her gown, the gala in London, but nothing personal. I wish I'd paid more attention, but I was focused on my work. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her mind attuned to the faint hesitation in Clara's tone. She recalled a seamstress from her youth, a woman whose quiet exterior had masked a fierce loyalty to her clients, and wondered if Clara's reticence stemmed from a similar instinct. Of course, she said gently, but sometimes the smallest things, a word, a look, come back to us later. You mentioned her being unsettled that last day, and there was the telephone call from a man asking for Mr. Lyle. It's curious, isn't it, how such moments linger? Clara's needle resumed its rhythm, but her movements were stiffer now, as if the fabric resisted her touch. The call, yes, she said. I told you about that. She took it in the back, didn't say much. I thought it was about her art dealings, nothing more. She paused, her eyes flickering to Miss Marple's face, then away. You think it meant something, don't you? Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but probing. I think, Clara, that you're a woman who notices more than you let on. You've a keen eye, as any dressmaker must. And I think, perhaps, you're holding something back, not out of malice, but out of kindness or fear. If there's anything you haven't shared, now is the time. The truth, you see, has a way of protecting those who help it along. Clara's hands stilled, the needle poised above the serge. For a moment, she seemed to wrestle with an inner debate, her lips parting, then closing again. Finally, she set the fabric aside and met Miss Marple's gaze, her eyes shadowed with unease. You're right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There's something I didn't tell the inspector. I didn't think it mattered, and I didn't want to make things worse, but it's been gnawing at me ever since. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. Go on, my dear, she said. Whatever it is, you're safe to tell me. Clara took a deep breath, her hands clasping together as if to steady herself. It was the day before the murder, she said. Mrs. Grayson came for her final fitting, the one for the bodice. She was nervous, more than usual, kept checking the window, as I told you. But after the call from Mr. Lyle's man, she stayed a bit longer while I adjusted a seam. We were alone, Lily was in the workroom, and she confided in me. She said she was afraid of her husband, said he'd been following her, watching her in London. She thought he suspected her of being unfaithful. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind seizing on the revelation. Afraid of Mr. Grayson. She murmured. Did she say why she thought he was following her? Or what she feared he might do? Clara shook her head, her fingers twisting together. She didn't go into details, just said he'd changed, become colder, more watchful. She mentioned a letter he'd found, one she hadn't meant him to see. She was vague about it, but I got the sense it was from someone in London, maybe Mr. Lyle. She said she tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. I told her to talk to him, to clear the air, but she just smiled, a sad sort of smile, and said it was too late for that. Miss Marple's thoughts raced, weaving Clara's words into the tapestry of the case. The letter, perhaps the one burned in the Grayson cottage, its initials, VLA silent accusation. Eleanor's fear her cryptic words to Lily about the gown. Not mattering if she wasn't there to wear it, all pointed to a woman trapped in a web of suspicion and dread. "That's very significant, Clara," she said. "Why didn't you tell the inspector?" Clara's cheeks flushed, her voice trembling. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Mr. Grayson's a solicitor, a man with influence, and Mrs. Grayson. She was so private I felt I'd be betraying her, dragging her marriage into the open. Besides, I thought it might make me look involved, somehow. I was in the shop, after all, when it happened. What if they thought I had something to do with it?" Miss Marple reached out, her hand resting lightly on Clara's. "You've no cause to fear, my dear," she said. "You've done nothing wrong, but this information could help find the truth. You must tell Inspector Craddock, and soon. I'll come with you, if you like." Clara nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I will," she said. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I've felt so alone, carrying this." Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her attention was drawn to a small detail she hadn't noticed before: bandage on Clara's right hand, partially hidden by her sleeve. It was fresh, the edges crisp, covering what appeared to be a small cut or scrape. "That looks painful," she said, her tone conversational. "A mishap with your scissors, perhaps." Clara glanced at her hand, her expression flickering with surprise, as if she'd forgotten the bandage. "Oh, it's nothing, really. I nicked myself yesterday, handling some wire for a bonnet frame. Clumsy of me." Miss Marple nodded, her face serene, but her mind filed the detail away. A cut, fresh and unexplained, in the context of a murder scene, was a thread worth following. She recalled a case in her youth where a woman's minor injury had proven a key to her guilt, and wondered if Clara's bandage concealed more than a simple accident. Leaving the shop, Miss Marple decided to visit the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement's knack for gossip might yield further insights into Clara's state of mind. The vicarage was a haven of roses and polished silver, and Mrs. Clement, arranging a tray of scones, welcomed Miss Marple with delight. "You're deep in this mystery, I can tell," she said, pouring tea. "What's the latest? Is it true that art dealer's been questioned?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes twinkling with quiet amusement. "Mr. Lyle has indeed spoken with the inspector," she said. "But I'm more curious about Clara Henshaw today. She's borne a great strain, poor woman. Have you noticed anything about her these past few days? A change in her manner, perhaps?" Mrs. Clement's brow furrowed, her mind sifting through the village's daily dramas. "Clara's been quieter, of course," she said. "Who wouldn't be, with a murder in her shop? But now that you mention it, she was at the church yesterday, lighting a candle. I thought it odd, she's not usually one for such gestures. And she looked haunted, I'd say. Kept wringing her hands, and there was a bandage on one, I noticed. Said she'd cut it on a needle, but it looked more like a burn to me." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained calm. A bandage, described as a burn rather than a cut-in. Another inconsistency, small but telling. "A burn," she murmured. "How curious. And did she say anything about the murder or Mrs. Grayson?" "Not much," Mrs. Clement said, offering a scone. "Just that she felt responsible for leaving Mrs. Grayson alone. I told her it was nonsense, but she seemed weighed down by it. Poor Clarashi's always been so proud of her shop. This must feel like a stain on her reputation." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts circling the bandage, Clara's secret, and the fear that had kept her silent. She thanked Mrs. Clement and made her way to the police station, where Inspector Craddock was reviewing a stack of telegrams from London. He looked up, his face brightening at her arrival. "Miss Marple," he said, "you've a knack for turning up with news. We've just had word on Lyle's alibi. His gallery owner, Holt, confirms the lunch, but the timing's a bit vague. Could have been 11, could have been 11:30. We're checking the taxi records now." "That's promising," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "But I've something else for you, Inspector. Clara Henshaw has shared a confidence, one she's kept from you until now. She says Mrs. Grayson was afraid of her husband, believed he was following her, suspecting her of infidelity. There was a letter to Bat Mr. Grayson found possibly from Mr. Lyle. Clara's willing to tell you herself, but she's frightened." Craddock's pencil paused, his eyes narrowing. "That's a game changer," he said. "Grayson's been cagey about his marriage, and this fits with the burned letter we found. I'll have Clara in for a statement, and we'll press Grayson harder." "Anything else?" Miss Marple hesitated, choosing her words with care. "Only a small detail," she said. "Clara has a bandage on her hand, claims it's a cut from a wire, but Mrs. Clement thought it looked like a burn. It may be nothing, but in a case like this, every mark tells a story." Craddock jotted a note, his expression thoughtful. "You're right about that," he said. "We'll ask her about it, gently. And we're digging into Grayson's past. Turns out he did more than fish in his youth. He was a volunteer with the Coast Guard, learned all sorts of knots. That tape measure knots looking more like his handiwork." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, her mind picturing the knot's intricate twists. A sailor's skill turned to darker purpose. "A man's past," she said softly, "often shapes his present, Inspector. Keep looking, and the pieces will fall into place." As she left the station, the village was bathed in the golden light of late morning, its lanes alive with the chatter of sparrows. Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of new connections: Clara's secret, the bandage, Grayson's maritime skills. She recalled a woman in her village, years ago, whose silence had protected a guilty man until the truth broke free. Clara, she suspected, was no accomplice, but her fear had clouded her judgment, and the bandage hinted at a moment of carelessness or concealment. She decided to walk past Rose Cottage to see if Harold Grayson was about. The cottage was quiet, its curtains drawn, but a faint wisp of smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. She noted a small pile of leaves by the gate, undisturbed since her last visit, and wondered if Grayson had kept to himself, brooding over his wife's death, thaw her secrets. Returning home, Miss Marple settled by her fire, her knitting resumed. The click of her needles was a counterpoint to her thoughts, which circled Clara's confession and the bandage that told a different story. She thought of her garden, where a single weed could choke a rose if left unchecked, and saw in Clara a woman caught in a similar tangle: loyalty, fear, and a secret that had nearly undone her. With a quiet resolve, she set her knitting aside, her mind already weaving the next thread in the web. The truth, she was certain, was drawing closer, like a rose unfurling its petals to reveal the thorn within. Chapter 8. The earrings twinned. The 5th day since Eleanor Grayson's murder draped St. Mary Mead in a gentle haze, the morning sun filtering through wisps of fog that clung to the hedgerows. The village, though outwardly calm, thrummed with a quiet tension, its inhabitants whispering over teacups and garden fences about the tragedy that had unfolded in Clara Henshaw's shop. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped lightly over her shoulders, stepped out with her basket, her eyes as sharp as the dew-glistened thorns in her garden. The threads of the Case Claras confession, Vincent Lyle's slippery alibi, Harold Grayson's simmering jealousy had woven a complex tapestry. But Miss Marple sensed a new clue was about to surface, one that might tighten the weave of her suspicions. Her destination was Clara's shop, where a chance discovery promised to shift the pattern of the mystery. The bell above the shop door chimed softly as she entered, its familiar note a stark contrast to the grim memory of Eleanor's death. Clara was at her work table, her fingers guiding a length of ivory silk with mechanical precision, though her face bore the strain of sleepless nights. Lily Bates, the apprentice, was in the corner sorting a tray of buttons, her fair hair catching the light as she worked. The shop was pristine, its fabrics neatly folded, but an air of unease lingered, as if the walls themselves recalled the scream that had shattered their peace. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair with her usual unassuming grace. "And Lily, too. You're both keeping the shop in fine order, I see. It's a testament to your strength after such a trial." Clara managed a faint smile, setting down her needle. "Thank you, Miss Marple. We're trying to carry on. It's what Mrs. Grayson would have wanted. I think she loved her gowns, so—" Her voice faltered, and she glanced at Lily, who nodded in silent agreement. Miss Marple's eyes, gentle but searching, took in the room. "I've been thinking of Mrs. Grayson," she said, her tone conversational. "That pearl earring, found here after the tragedy, it's such a curious detail. I wonder, have you come across anything else of hers in your tidying? A glove, perhaps, or the earrings, twin?" Clara shook her head, her hands resuming their work. "Nothing, Miss Marple. The police took the earring, and we've swept the place top to bottom. If there was anything else, it's long gone." Lily, however, paused, her fingers hovering over the buttons. A flush crept into her cheeks, and she glanced at Clara, as if seeking permission to speak. There was something," she said hesitantly, her voice barely audible. "I didn't think it mattered, but yesterday, when I was hemming Mrs. Grayson's gown, the one she was to wear for the gala, I found it. The other earring." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. "The other earring," she repeated, her voice soft but encouraging. "That's very significant, Lily. Where was it, exactly?" Lily rose, fetching a small muslin pouch from a drawer. She tipped its contents onto the table, revealing a pearl earring, its luster matching the one found on the shop floor. "It was caught in the seam," she said, her eyes wide. "The bodice, where Mrs. Henshaw had pinned it for the fitting. I was checking the stitches, and there it was, tucked inside the fabric. I thought it must have come loose during what happened." Miss Marple leaned forward, her fingers lightly touching the earring. Its clasp, like its twins, bore a tiny scratch, faint but distinct, as if it had been snagged or pulled. "A remarkable find," she said. "And you're quite sure it was in the gown?" Lily nodded, her cheeks still flushed. "I checked it myself, Miss Marple. The seam was tight, no way it could have slipped in after. It must have been there since her last fitting, the day it happened." Clara, listening, paled slightly, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "I had no idea," she said. "Lily, why didn't you tell me?" "I meant to," Lily said, her voice trembling. "But it was late, and you were so tired, and I thought it could wait till morning. I didn't know it was important." Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch light but reassuring. "You've done exactly right, Lily. This earring could tell us much about that day. We must inform Inspector Craddock at once. Clara, would you mind if I took it to him? I'll ensure it's handled properly." Clara nodded, her expression troubled. Of course, Miss Marple, anything to help. But what does it mean? To earrings, both here it's so strange. Strange indeed, Miss Marple said, her eyes distant. But every clue is a stitch in the pattern, my dear. We'll see where this one leads. She tucked the earring into her basket, wrapped carefully in a handkerchief, and left the shop, her thoughts a whirl of new possibilities. The earrings, both found in the shop, suggested a struggle violent enough to tear them from Elinor's ears, yet contained enough to leave the scene undisturbed. She recalled a case in her youth where a lost brooch had pointed to a thief's haste, and wondered if the earrings betrayed a similar moment of chaos. Her next stop was the police station, where Inspector Craddock was sifting through a stack of reports, his face etched with the fatigue of a case that refused to yield. He brightened at her arrival, waving her to a chair. "Miss Marple," he said, "you're a sight for sore eyes. We've hit a wall with Lyle's alibi. The taxi driver's memory is fuzzy, and Holt's sticking to his story. But there's a half-hour gap we can't account for. What's on your mind?" Miss Marple set her basket on the desk, carefully, unwrapping the earring. "A new discovery, Inspector," she said, placing it before him. "Lily Bates found this in Mrs. Grayson's gown, caught in a seam. It's the twin to the one from the shop floor, complete with a scratched clasp. It suggests a struggle, don't you think? And it places both earrings in the shop at the time of the murder." Craddock's eyes widened, and he reached for the earring, turning it in the light. "This is big," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "A struggle, yes, but a quick one. Clara was only gone a moment, and the scratches could be from the tape measure or something else caught in the fray. I'll have it sent to the lab with the other. Anything else from the shop?" Miss Marple hesitated, choosing her words with care. "Only that Clara and Lily are still shaken," she said. "Clara's been forthcoming, as you know, about Mrs. Grayson's fear of her husband. But there's a detail about Clara herself, a bandage on her hand, which she says is a cut from a wire. Mrs. Clement thought it looked like a burn. It's a small thing, but in a case like this, small things matter." Craddock jotted a note, his brow furrowing. "A burn, not a cut," he murmured. "We'll ask her about it, discreetly. And we've been digging into Grayson's past. His Coast Guard days gave him a knack for knots, no question. We're bringing him in again today, to press him on that letter and his wife's fears. He's been too calm, Miss Marple. It's not natural." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts circling the knot, the earrings, and Clara's bandage. "Calm," she said softly, "can be a mask, Inspector, but masks slip, given time. I'd suggest showing Mr. Grayson the earring. It may unsettle him, reveal something he's kept hidden." Leaving the station, Miss Marple decided to call on Harold Grayson to gauge his reaction to the case's progress. Rose Cottage was quiet, its curtains still drawn, but a faint light glowed from the parlor window. She knocked, and after a moment, Harold opened the door, his face haggard, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice flat. "Come in, though I've little to offer. The police have been here again, asking their questions." Miss Marple stepped into the parlor, noting the unchanged chill of the room, the photograph of Eleanor, still prominent on the mantel. "I won't keep you long, Mr. Grayson," she said, settling into a chair. "I've just come from the police, where they've had a new finder second of your wife's earrings, caught in her gown at Clara's shop. It's a curious thing, don't you think? Both earrings there, yet so little trace of the struggle, Harold's hands clenched, then relaxed, his face a mask of controlled grief. "The earrings," he said, his voice tight. "She loved them. I told you she'd never have parted with them willingly. If they were both there, it means someone attacked her, tore them off. But I wasn't there, Miss Marple. I was in London, as I told the inspector." Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the faint tremor in his voice, the way his eyes avoided the photograph. "Of course," she said gently, "but it's natural to wonder, isn't it? The police mentioned a letter, one you found, perhaps, from Mr. Lyle. It must have been painful to doubt her loyalty." Harold's jaw tightened, and he rose, pacing to the fireplace. "Painful, yes," he said, his voice low. "I found his card, then the letter. She said it was nothing, just art talk. I wanted to believe her, but the doubts, they grew. I burned the letter, Miss Marple. I couldn't bear to see it, but I didn't kill her. I loved her, despite everything." Marple's lips pursed, her mind picturing the charred fragment, the initials VLA silent accusation. "Love," she said softly, "can be a heavy burden, Mr. Grayson, and doubts can twist it into something darker. Thank you for your candor. I shan't trouble you further." As she left the cottage, the village was stirring into its midday rhythm, the tea room's windows steaming with the promise of lunch. Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of new connections, the earrings, their scratched clasps suggesting a frantic moment, Clara's bandage, a possible burn rather than a cut, Harold's admission of burning the letter, his love laced with suspicion. She recalled a case in her youth where a man's jealousy had led to a rash act, undone by a single overlooked detail. Harold, she suspected, was teetering on such an edge. She decided to visit the tea room, where Miss Hartnell's sharp ears might yield further insights. The room was bustling, its tables filled with villagers eager for news. Miss Hartnell, pouring tea with practiced efficiency, beckoned Miss Marple to a corner table. "You're on the hunt, I can tell," she said, her eyes glinting. "What's the latest?" "They're saying the police found something new at Clara's shop." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression one of polite curiosity. "A small thing," she said, "the second earring found in Mrs. Grayson's gown. It stirred things up, as you can imagine. But I'm curious about Clara, Miss Hartnell. She's been through so much. Have you noticed anything about her these past days?" Miss Hartnell leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Clara's been a ghost of herself," she said. "Came in here yesterday, looking like she hadn't slept. Ordered tea, but barely touched it, and there was a bandage on her hand, said it was a cut from her work, but it looked fresh, like she'd done it that morning. I thought it odd, with all that's happened. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind seizing on the bandage, its story shifting with each telling. "Wonder, indeed," she murmured. "And Mr. Grayson, has he been about?" "Not much," Miss Hartnell said, sniffing. "Saw him at the post office, collecting a letter. Looked like a man with the world on his shoulders. I heard he's been questioned against something about a letter he burned. The village is saying he was jealous, thought his wife was stepping out with that Lyle fellow." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, her thoughts weaving the tea room's gossip into the case's pattern. She thanked Miss Hartnell and left, her steps turning toward home as the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the fog. The earrings, the bandage, Harold's confessional were threads, but the knot remained the key, its intricate twists. A signature of intent. She thought of her garden, where a single rose could hide a thorn that drew blood. and saw in Harold a man whose love had soured into something lethal. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resumed. The click of her needles was a counterpoint to her thoughts, which circled the earrings and the bandage, Clara's fear and Harold's doubts. She recalled a young couple in her village whose trust had crumbled under suspicion, and how a single act had undone them. The truth, she was certain, was close now, like a rose unfurling to reveal its core. With a quiet resolve, she set her knitting aside, her mind already tracing the next thread in the web, ready to pull it tight and expose the heart of the crime. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. The 6th day since Eleanor Grayson's murder cast St. Mary Mead in a pale, restless light, the sky streaked with clouds that promised rain but held back, as if mirroring the village's suspended unease. The whispers of the crime had grown into a steady hum, weaving through tea rooms and churchyards, each villager adding a thread to the tapestry of speculation. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped lightly over her shoulders, stepped out with a quiet resolve, her mind a delicate web of clues. The pearl earrings, Clara's bandage, Harold Grayson's burned letter, Vincent Lyle's polished denials. Today, she sensed the threads would converge, drawn tight by the weight of truth. Inspector Craddock had summoned the key figures to Clara's shop for a confrontation, a gathering designed to shake loose the secrets that clung like dust to the fabric. Of the case, Miss Marple made her way to the dressmaker's parlor, the bell above the door chiming softly as she entered. The shop, though tidy, bore a faint air of disquiet, its polished surfaces reflecting the tension of the moment. Clara Henshaw stood by her work table, her hands clasped tightly, her face pale but composed. Lily Bates hovered near the fitting mirror, her eyes wide with apprehension, her fingers twisting a scrap of muslin. Harold Grayson, summoned from Rose Cottage, stood rigidly by the window, his suit impeccable but his expression strained, as if the weight of suspicion had carved new lines into his face. Vincent Lyle, summoned from the inn, leaned against a mannequin with an air of studied ease, his pinstriped suit and gold watch chain gleaming in the morning light. Inspector Craddock, his notebook tucked under his arm, stood at the center of the room, his presence a steady anchor amid the gathering storm. Miss Marple, Craddock said, nodding as she settled into a chair. "I'm glad you're here. Your insights have brought us this far, and I've a feeling we'll need them today. We've gathered everyone to go over the evidence, see if we can't shake something loose." Miss Marple inclined her head, her eyes sweeping the room. "A wise decision, Inspector," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Truth has a way of surfacing when pressed, like a stitch pulled tight. I shall listen and observe." Craddock cleared his throat, addressing the group. "We're here to discuss the murder of Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, killed in this shop 6 days ago, strangled with a tape measure. We've new evidence, and I want to hear from each of you to clear up discrepancies and get to the truth. Let's start with the facts." He held up a small evidence bag containing the 2 pearl earrings. These were Mrs. Grayson's found. Here, one on the floor, the other caught in the seam of her unfinished gown. Both have scratched clasps, suggesting a struggle. "Mrs. Henshaw, you were in the back room when the murder occurred. Can you confirm the timeline?" Clara nodded, her hands tightening. "It was just past 11, she said, her voice steady but low. Mrs. Grayson was trying on the bodice. I needed navy thread from the back 2 minutes, 3 at most. When I returned, she was gone. I screamed, and Lily came running." Craddock turned to Lily, who flinched under his gaze. "Miss Bates, you were in the workroom. Did you hear anything before the scream?" Lily shook her head, her cheeks flushing. "Nothing, sir. I was cutting patterns, humming to myself. The workroom's at the back, and the walls are thick. Only heard Mrs. Henshaw's scream, and then I saw her." Miss Marple watched Lily closely, noting the girl's genuine distress but also the quick glance she cast at Clara, as if seeking reassurance. Loyalty, she thought, or perhaps fear of saying too much. Her gaze shifted to Harold Grayson, whose hands were clenched at his sides, his eyes fixed on the earrings. "Mr. Grayson," Craddock said, his tone firm, "you claim you were in London that morning, at your office by 9. Your clerk confirms it, but we've reason to believe you suspected your wife of infidelity, possibly with Mr. Lyle. You found a letter, didn't you? One you burned." Harold's jaw tightened, and he stepped forward, his voice low but intense. "I told you, Inspector, I was in London. Yes, I found a letter Vincent Lyle's, or so I thought. It was addressed to Eleanor, full of flattery, talk of meetings. I confronted her, and she swore it was just business. I burned it because I couldn't bear to keep it, but I didn't kill her. I loved her, despite my doubts." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind picturing the charred fragment in the cottage grate, the initials VLA, silent accusation. Harold's grief seemed raw, but his control, even now, suggested a man accustomed to hiding his depths. She recalled a solicitor she'd known in her youth, whose calm exterior had masked a temper that flared in private, and wondered if Harold's love had twisted into something darker. Craddock turned to Vincent Lyle, who met his gaze with a faint smile, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. "Mr. Lyle, you claim your relationship with Mrs. Grayson was professional, yet you were seen near this shop last week, and your card was in her bag. You've an alibi for the murder lunch, with a gallery owner, but there's a half-hour gap we can't verify. Care to explain?" Lyle's smile widened, though his fingers brushed the watch chain at his waist, a gesture Miss Marple noted as calculated. "I've told you, Inspector," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "I was in London, preparing for my lunch. With Mr. Holt. The gap, as you call it, was spent in a taxi, navigating traffic. As for the shop, I've never been to St. Mary Mead before you summoned me. Whoever saw me must be mistaken. Not the only man in a suit, you know." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her thoughts circling Lyle's denial. The village whispers Mrs. Price's sighting, Lily's account of a man watching the shop contradicted his claim, and his casual dismissal felt too rehearsed. She thought of the knot around Eleanor's throat, its nautical precision, and recalled Lyle's sailing past. "Mr. Lyle," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a needle through silk. "You mentioned your sailing days when we last spoke. Such a skill leaves its mark, doesn't it? A knot, for instance, tied with a sailor's hand might, it linger in memory, ready to be used again." Lyle's smile faltered, just for a moment, and his eyes flickered with something amusement or unease. "A charming theory, Miss Marple," he said, recovering quickly. "But I'm afraid my sailing days are long behind me, and I've no knack for tape measures, nautical or otherwise." Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression serene but her mind sharp. Lyle's deflection was deft, but his reaction to the knot betrayed a crack in his polished facade. She glanced at Craddock, who nodded slightly, signaling his intent to pursue the point later. Craddock held up another evidence bag, containing the fragment of burned letter. "This was found in your cottage, Mr. Grayson," he said, "addressed to your wife, signed with the initials VL. Mr. Lyle, care to explain why you were writing to Mrs. Grayson?" Lyle's brow lifted, his tone one of mild surprise. "I wrote no such letter," he said. "If it exists, it's not mine. I corresponded with Mrs. Grayson by telephone or in person about art. Perhaps someone else used my initials VL. Isn't so rare, you know." Harold's face reddened, and he took a step toward Lyle, his voice rising. "Don't lie," he snapped. "I saw it, read it. You were after her, filling her head with your charm. She was my wife, and you had no—" "Right." Craddock raised a hand, his voice firm. "Enough, Mr. Grayson. Sit down. We're here for answers, not accusations." Harold subsided, his hands trembling, and Miss Marple noted the raw edge to his anger, a glimpse of the passion that might have driven him to act. She turned her attention to Clara, who had remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Mrs. Henshaw," Miss Marple said gently, "you've been very helpful, sharing Mrs. Grayson's fears about her husband. But there's one more detail I'd like to clarify. Your bandage yesterday, you said it was a cut from a wire, but others thought it looked like a burn. Can you tell us how it happened?" Clara's hand instinctively covered the bandage, her face pulling further. It's nothing," she said, her voice faltering. "I told you I nicked myself on a wire, framing a bonnet. It's healing now." Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice soft but insistent. "A small thing, perhaps," she said, "but in a murder, every mark matters. If it was a burn, Clara, it might place you closer to the scene than you've said. You were in the back, yes, but could you have returned sooner, seen something you've not shared?" Clara's eyes widened, and she shook her head, her voice rising. "No, Miss Marple, I swear. I was in the back, fetching thread. I didn't see anything until she was dead. The bandage is just a cut, I promise." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic but her mind alert. Clara's distress was genuine, but the bandage remained a puzzle, its shifting story a thread that refused to blend into the pattern. She thought of a seamstress in her youth, whose nervous hands had betrayed a hidden truth, and wondered if Clara's fear stemmed from guilt or simply the weight of the moment. Craddock stepped forward, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "Let's focus on the murder itself," he said. The tape measure was knotted with a sailor's precision, a skill not common in a dressmaker's shop. "Mr. Grayson, you were with the Coast Guard in your youth, learned knots there. Mr. Lyle, you sailed competitively. Either of you could have tied it, and both of you had reason to be near Mrs. Grayson. Jealousy for one, perhaps ambition for the other." Lyle's smile returned, though it was thinner now. "Ambition," he said. "I'm flattered, Inspector, but I had no reason to harm Mrs. Grayson. She was a client, nothing more. And as for knots, I'm out of practice. You'd do better to look at Mr. Grayson's motives. He's the one with the burned letter and a wife he couldn't trust." Harold's eyes flashed, but he remained silent, his hands clenched into fists. Miss Marple watched the interplay, her thoughts circling the knot, the earrings, the letter. She rose, her slight figure commanding the room's attention despite her unassuming air. "Inspector," she said, her voice clear and steady, "if I may. The truth lies not in accusations, but in the details. The earrings tell us of a struggle, brief but violent. The letter points to suspicion, but not necessarily guilt. And the knot is the heart of it. It was tied by someone who knew Mrs. Grayson's habits, her fittings, her moments alone. Someone who waited, who watched, and who acted, with a purpose that was both passionate and precise. The room fell silent, all eyes on Miss Marple. Clara's hands trembled, Lily's eyes widened, Harold's face paled, and Lyle's smile faded entirely. Craddock nodded, his expression one of quiet respect. "You've a way of cutting to the core, Miss Marple," he said, "and you're right. The knot's the key. We'll keep digging, and we'll find the hand that tied it." As the gathering dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze sweeping the shop one last time. The fitting mirror, its ornate frame glinting in the light, seemed to hold the echoes of that fatal morning. She thought of Eleanor, her fear of her husband, her guarded calls with Lyle, and the earrings torn away in a moment of violence. The confrontation had stirred the waters, but the truth remained just below the surface. Like a fish darting through a stream, she decided to walk to the tea room, where Miss Hartnell's sharp ears might offer a final piece of the puzzle. The room was quiet, its tables sparsely occupied, and Miss Hartnell, polishing a teapot, greeted her with a knowing look. "You've been at the shop, haven't you?" she said, pouring tea. "The whole village knows about the inspectors. Meeting, did they catch the killer?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes twinkling with quiet amusement. "Not yet, Miss Hartnell," she said, "but the net is tightening. I'm curious, though, have you seen Mr. Grayson or Mr. Lyle about today? Or perhaps Clara after the meeting?" Miss Hartnell leaned forward, her voice dropping. Clara was in earlier, looking like she'd seen a ghost. Ordered tea, but left it untouched, kept rubbing that bandaged hand of hers. Said she'd cut it on a pin, but it looked fresh, like it happened today. As for Grayson, he passed by an hour ago, heading toward the station. Looked like a man on his last nerve. Lyle, now, I saw him at the inn, writing in a little notebook. Cool as you please, that one. Miss Marple nodded, her mind seizing on Clara's bandage, its story shifting yet again. A pin, a wire, a burn, each explanation, a thread that refused to tie neatly. She thanked Miss Hartnell and left, her steps turning toward home as the clouds began to gather, their edges tinged with the promise of rain. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resumed. The click of her needles was a counterpoint to her thoughts, which circled the confrontation, the earrings, the letter, the knot, and Clara's elusive injury. She recalled a case in her youth where a woman's nervous tic had betrayed her knowledge of a crime, and saw in Clara a similar struggle, her fear battling her honesty. The truth, she was certain, was close now, like a rose unfurling to reveal its heart. With a quiet resolve, she set her knitting aside, her mind already tracing the final threads in the web, ready to pull them tight and expose the killer's hand. Chapter 10. The motive unraveled. The 7th day since Eleanor Grayson's murder dawned over St. Mary Mead with a quiet intensity, the air sharp and clear, as if the village itself held its breath for the resolution of the tragedy that had shaken its core. The confrontation in Clara Henshaw's shop had stirred the waters of suspicion, leaving ripples that Miss Jane Marple, with her unerring instinct, was determined to trace to their source. Her cottage, bathed in the soft light of morning, was a haven of order, its lace curtains framing a world where human nature, in all its complexity, played out like a drama on a familiar stage. As she sipped her tea, her knitting needles silent for once, Miss Marple's mind wove the threads of the case-to-pearl earrings, the burned letter, Clara's bandage, Vincent Lyle's evasive charm, and Harold Grayson's tightly wound greffintu. a pattern that was nearing completion. Today, she sensed, the final stitch would be set, revealing the hand that had tied the fatal knot. Miss Marple's first task was to confer with Inspector Craddock, whose methodical approach she respected, though she knew her own insights often caught the glints of truth that eluded official channels. She made her way to the police station, her steps light but purposeful, her straw hat shielding her eyes from the sun's early glare. The station was a bustle of activity, with constables sorting telegrams and a clerk answering a ringing telephone. Craddock, looking both weary and determined, welcomed her with a nod. His desk cluttered with reports and evidence bags. "Miss Marple," he said, pushing a chair forward, "you've a knack for timing. Yesterday's meeting shook things up, but we're still short of a confession. Grayson's rattled, Lyle's too smooth, and Clara's holding something back. I can feel it. What's your take?" Miss Marple settled into the chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "The confrontation was illuminating, Inspector," she said, her voice soft but precise. "Each of them revealed a piece of themselves: Mr. Grayson's passion, Mr. Lyle's calculation, Mrs. Henshaw's fear. But it's the knot, as you've said, that holds the key. Its precision, its purpose. It speaks of a hand both practiced and driven. I've been thinking, too, about the earrings found in such telling places. They suggest a struggle, yes, but also a moment of distraction, as if the killer overlooked them in haste." Craddock leaned forward, his pencil poised. "Haste, you say? That fits with the timeline. Clara was only gone a moment. But Grayson's alibi is tight, and Lyle's is holding, just barely. We've confirmed he was at the Savoy by 11:30. But that half-hour gap nags at me, and Clara's bandage her story keeps shifting. A cut, a burn, a pin. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple's lips pursed, her thoughts circling the bandage, a detail that refused to blend into the pattern. "It's curious," she said. "A small injury, yet its explanation changes with each telling. It may be nothing, or it may place her closer to the act than she admits. But my mind keeps returning to Mr. Grayson, his Coast Guard days, his knowledge of knots, his discovery of the letter. These are not mere coincidences. I believe, Inspector, that we're ready to unravel the motive, and with it, the truth." Craddock nodded, his eyes bright with anticipation. "I've called Grayson in again this morning," he said. "We'll show him the earrings, press him on the letter and his wife's fears. If you're right, he'll crack. Care to join us?" Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression serene. "I'd be glad to, Inspector. A man under pressure reveals his true colors, and I suspect Mr. Grayson's are darker than he'd have us believe." The interview room was stark, its bare walls and ticking clock lending a sense of inevitability to the proceedings. Harold Grayson arrived promptly, his suit pressed but his face haggard, as if sleep had eluded him since the confrontation. He sat stiffly, his hands clasped on the table, his eyes wary as Craddock began. "Mr. Grayson," Craddock said, his tone firm but measured, "we've new evidence that needs explaining. These earrings," he held up the evidence bag, the pearls glinting in the light, "were your wife's, found in the shop, one on the floor, one in her gown. Both scratched, suggesting a struggle. You say you were in London, but you suspected Eleanor of infidelity, didn't you? That letter you burned, signed Violet, drove you to act, didn't it?" Harold's hands tightened, his knuckles whitening. "I've told you, Inspector," he said, his voice low but steady. "I was in London, at my office. Yes, I found the letter, and yes, it hurt. I thought she was slipping away, caught up with that Lyle fellow, but I didn't kill her. I burned the letter because I couldn't bear to see it, not because I had blood on my hands." Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the tremor in his voice, the way his eyes flicked to the earrings and then away, as if they accused him silently. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but piercing. "Mr. Grayson," she said, "you loved your wife, that much is clear. But love, when poisoned by doubt, can turn to something else. You were with the Coast Guard years ago, learned knots that held fast against the sea. The knot around Eleanor's throat was no ordinary tie, was deliberate, practiced, the work of a man who knew what he was doing. Can you tell us, truly, that it wasn't your hand?" Harold's face paled, and for a moment he seemed to waver, his shoulders sagging under an unseen weight. I knew knots, yes," he said, his voice faltering. "But I haven't tied one in years. I was in London, Miss Marple. I couldn't have been here. You have to believe me." Craddock pressed forward, his tone unrelenting. "Then explain." "Clara's statement. She says Eleanor was afraid of you, thought you were following her, suspecting her of an affair. That letter wasn't the first sign, was it? You'd been watching her, hadn't you?" Harold's hands slammed onto the table, his voice rising. "Yes, I watched her," he snapped, his control slipping. "I followed her to London once, saw her with Lyle at a gallery. She laughed with him, smiled in a way she hadn't with me in months. I thought she was betraying me, but I didn't kill her. I loved her even then." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind seizing. On his admission, the pieces were falling into place, the pattern clear at last. She rose, her slight figure commanding the room's attention. "Inspector," she said, her voice steady, "I believe we have enough to see the truth. Let me lay it out as I see it, and perhaps Mr. Grayson will help us fill the gaps." Craddock nodded, his expression one of quiet respect. "Go ahead, Miss Marple. Let's hear it." Miss Marple turned to Harold, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Grayson," she began, "your love for Eleanor was your strength, but also your undoing. You suspected her of an affair with Vincent Lyle, fueled by his card, the letter, and your own observations in London. Your jealousy grew, a slow poison that clouded your judgment. You knew her habits, her fittings at Clara's shop, her moments alone while Clara fetched thread. You learned of her appointment that morning, perhaps from a casual word she let slip. You saw your chance." Harold shook his head, his eyes wide, but Miss Marple continued, her voice calm but relentless. "You weren't in London as long as you claimed, were you? Your clerk saw you at 9, but the train from London to St. Mary Mead is swift, and a man in a hurry could make it back by 11. You slipped into the shop, knowing Clara would be in the back, knowing the bell above the door could be silenced. With a careful hand, you confronted Eleanor, perhaps hoping to reconcile, but your anger took hold. In a moment of rage, you seized the tape measure there on the table, a tool at hand, and strangled her, tying it with a knot from your Coast Guard. Days, a knot you hadn't forgotten. Harold's face contorted, his hands gripping the table's edge. "No," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. And Miss Marple pressed on. "The earrings," she said, "were torn away in the struggle, one falling to the floor, the other caught in the gown's seam. You didn't notice, in your haste, nor did you see the button from your coat, lost in the chaos. Clara returned, screamed, and you fled out the back door you knew was bolted but could be unlatched from within. You caught the next train back to London, your alibi frayed but intact, and burned the letter to erase your shame. But the knot, Mr. Grayson's, betrayed you. It was your signature, a mark of your skill and your fury. Harold's shoulders slumped, and he buried his face in his hands, his voice a broken murmur. "I didn't mean to," he said, the words spilling out like water from a cracked dam. "I followed her, yes, to talk, to understand, but she laughed, said I was a fool to doubt her, that Lyle meant nothing. I saw red, Miss Marple, the tape measure was there, and I couldn't stop. I tied it tight, like I used to on the boats, and then she was gone. I panicked, ran. I thought I'd covered it, but you saw it all." Craddock leaned forward, his voice firm but not unkind. "Harold Grayson, you're under arrest for the murder of Eleanor Grayson. Anything you say can be used against you. Do you understand?" Harold nodded, his face ashen, his eyes distant. "I understand," he whispered. "I loved her, but I killed her. God help me." Miss Marple sat back, her expression one of quiet sorrow. The truth, though necessary, was always a heavy burden. She thought of a young man in her village whose passion had led to ruin, and saw in Harold a similar tragedy, a love that had burned too fiercely, consuming all in its path. Craddock signalled a constable to take Harold away, then turned to Miss Marple, his face a mix of admiration and relief. "You did it, Miss Marple," he said. "That not the earrings you saw what we missed. But what about Clara's bandage, and Lyle's role? Are they clear?" Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts settling like dust after a storm. "Clara's bandage, I believe, was a simple accidenta, cut from her work, misdescribed in her distress. She was no accomplice, only a woman caught in the shadow of a crime, her fear of scandal keeping her silent too long. As for Mr. Lyle, his connection to Eleanor was likely innocent, a business acquaintance exaggerated by village gossip and Harold's jealousy. The letter was a red herring. Lyle had rejected Lyle's advances, if indeed he made any, but Harold's doubts made it a catalyst. The knot, Inspector, was always the key, and it pointed to Harold's hand. Craddock jotted a final note, his expression thoughtful. "We'll clear up the loose ends," he said. "Lyle's alibi will be checked again, but I suspect your righty's a bystander, not a killer. Clara and Lily will need to give final statements, but they're in the clear. You've a gift, Miss Marple, for seeing the human heart." Miss Marple smiled faintly, rising with her basket. "The heart, Inspector, is where all mysteries begin and end. I'm only glad to have helped in my small way." As she left the station, the village was stirring into its daily rhythm, the tea room's windows glowing with the promise of scones. Miss Marple decided to visit Clara, to reassure her that the truth had surfaced. The shop was quiet, Clara at her work table, Lily sorting threads in the corner. Both looked up as the bell chimed, their faces a mix of hope and apprehension. "Miss Marple," Clara said, setting down her needle. "Is there news? The village is saying Mr. Grayson's been arrested." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her voice gentle. "It's true, Clara. Mr. Grayson has confessed. He acted in a moment of jealousy, driven by doubts about his wife's loyalty. You and Lily are clear, my dear. The truth has set you free, as it always does." Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for Lily's hand. "Thank God." She whispered, "I was so afraid, Miss Marple, I thought they might suspect me, because I was there." "You did nothing wrong," Miss Marple said, her tone reassuring. "Your honesty, in the end, helped us see the way." Keep your shop, Clara, and let this fade. The village will forget in time. Lily nodded, her eyes bright. Thank you. Miss Marple, you believed me, even when I was scared to speak. Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch light but warm. You've a good heart, Lily. Trust it, and it will guide you. Leaving the shop, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Vincent. Lyle, who would soon leave St. Mary Mead, his role in the drama reduced to a footnote. She passed the inn, where he was visible through the window, packing a valise with the same studied ease he'd shown in the interview. His charm, she mused, had been a distraction, but not a deception. The real tragedy lay with Harold, whose love had twisted into a knot that bound him to his crime, back in her cottage. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resumed. The click of her needles was a counterpoint to her thoughts, which lingered on the unravelling of the motive jealousy, a poison that had consumed Harold's heart. She thought of her garden, where a single weed could choke a rose, and saw in Harold a man undone by his own suspicions, his skill with knots a fatal echo of his past. The truth, she knew, was like a rose's bloom, beautiful but hard won, its thorns a reminder of the pain beneath. With a quiet resolve, she set her knitting aside, her mind at peace, ready for the next ripple in St. Mary Mead's tranquil waters. Chapter 11. The Confession. The 8th day following Eleanor Grayson's murder settled over St. Mary Mead with a sombre stillness, as if the village exhaled a collective sigh of relief, tempered by the weight of tragedy. The arrest of Harold Grayson had rippled through the lanes and cottages, quieting the fevered whispers that had gripped the community for a week. Yet for Miss Jane Marple, sitting by her parlor window with a cup of tea cooling in her hands, the resolution brought no triumph, only a quiet sorrow for the human frailties that had unravelled a marriage and a life. Her knitting lay untouched, the needles silent, as her mind retraced the threads of the castor pearl earrings, the intricate knot, the burned letter, Clara's hesitant truth-saw, now woven into a pattern that pointed unerringly to Harold's guilt. Today, she knew, the final confession would seal the truth, and she resolved to witness it. To ensure no loose thread remained, Miss Marple set out for the police station, her steps measured but purposeful, her shawl draped against the morning chill. The village was resuming its rhythm. Milk bottles clinked on doorsteps. The postman's whistle echoed faintly, but an undercurrent of reflection lingered, as if St. Mary Mead mourned not only Eleanor but the illusion of its own inviolability. At the station, Inspector Craddock was preparing for Harold's formal statement, his desk a clutter of reports and evidence bags, the pearl earrings and charred letter fragment prominent among them. He greeted Miss Marple with a nod, his face etched with the fatigue of a case concluded but not yet closed. "Miss Marple," he said, pulling out a chair, "you're here at the right moment. Grayson's ready to give a full confession, and I'd value your presence. You saw through this from the start, the knot, the earrings, all of it. I want to be sure we've missed nothing." Miss Marple settled into the chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I'm glad to help, Inspector," she said, her voice soft but steady. "A confession, if true, brings clarity, but it's the details that ensure justice. Mr. Grayson's heart has been laid bare, but his words must match the evidence." Craddock nodded, his expression one of quiet respect. "You're right. As always, we've got his initial admission, but he's been cagey about the specifics. I want the how and why down to the last minute. Let's see what he says." The interview room was stark, its bare walls and ticking clock a fitting backdrop for the gravity of the moment. Harold Grayson was brought in, his hands cuffed, his suit rumpled but his posture still rigid, as if clinging to the last vestiges of control. His face, pale and hollow, bore the marks of sleepless nights, his eyes shadowed with a mix of remorse and defiance. He sat heavily, his gaze flickering to Miss Marple, then settling on Craddock with a weary resignation. "Mr. Grayson," began, his notebook open, "you've admitted to killing your wife, Eleanor Grayson, in Clara Henshaw's shop on the morning of her murder. We need a full account, every step, every thought. Start from the beginning and leave nothing out." Harold took a deep breath, his hands clenching then relaxing on the table. "I'll tell you," he said, his voice low but steady. "I don't expect forgiveness, only to be heard. It started months ago when I noticed Eleanor changing. She was distant, always off to London, talking about galleries and gowns. I found Vincent Lyle's card in her bag, then the letter full of charm, talk of meetings. I confronted her, and she swore it was nothing, just art dealings. But I couldn't shake the doubt. It ate at me, day and night." Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the raw edge to his voice, the way his eyes lingered on the evidence bag containing the earrings. She thought of a young man in her village, years ago, whose suspicion had poisoned his love, and saw in Harold a similar tragedy, a man undone by his own heart. Harold continued, his voice growing softer. "I started following her, to London, to galleries. I saw her with Lyle once, at a cafe, laughing in a way she hadn't with me in years. I thought she was slipping away, betraying me. The day before her fitting, I overheard her on the telephone, arranging to meet Clara at 11. I knew she'd be alone for a moment. Clara always fetched thread or pins. I saw my chance, not to kill her, but to talk, to make her see how much I loved her." Craddock leaned forward, his pencil moving swiftly. "Go on," he said. "What happened that morning?" Harold's hands trembled, and he looked down as if the table held the scene he described. "I took the early train to London, as I told you, to keep my clerk's story straight. But I caught the 10 o'clock back to St. Mary Medit's, only a 40-minute ride. I knew the shop, knew the bell above the door could be silenced if you held it as you entered. I slipped in just after 11, while Clara was in the back. Eleanor was there, by the mirror, adjusting her gown. I begged her to tell me the truth about Lyle, to come back to me. She laughed, said I was a fool, that Lyle was nothing but a dealer she'd humoured. Something in me snapped. Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind picturing the shop, the mirror, reflecting Eleanor's defiance, Harold's mounting rage, and the tape measure, she asked, her voice gentle but piercing. "It was there, on the table, wasn't it?" Harold nodded, his eyes distant. "Yes, it was right there, coiled like a snake. I grabbed it, wrapped it around her throat before I knew what I was doing. She struggled, clawed at me, her earrings caught. One fell, the other tangled in the gown. I tied the knot tight, like I used to on the boats, in the Coast Guard. It was over in seconds. She went still, and I panicked. I unbolted the back door, slipped out, and caught the next train back to London. I thought I'd covered it, but the knot, I didn't think anyone would notice." Craddock's voice was firm, his eyes steady. "The knot was your mistake, Grayson. It was too precise, too practiced. And the earrings, why didn't you take them?" Harold shook his head, his voice breaking. "I didn't see them. It was so fast, so chaotic. I just wanted to get away. When I got home, I burned the letter, hoping to erase Lyle's name, my shame, but it was too late. I killed her, Inspector. I loved her, and I killed her. Miss Marple sat back, her expression one of quiet sorrow. The confession was complete, the motive laid bare: jealousy, a poison that had consumed Harold's heart, turning love into a fatal act. She thought of her garden, where a single weed could choke a rose, and saw in Harold a man whose doubts had grown unchecked, strangling the life he cherished. Craddock closed his notebook, his tone formal. Harold Grayson, your confession will be recorded, and you'll be charged with the murder of Eleanor Grayson. You'll remain in custody pending trial. Do you have anything else to add? Harold shook his head, his face ashen. Only that I'm sorry, he whispered. Not for myself, but for her. She didn't deserve it. As the constable led Harold away, Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his face a mix of relief and admiration. You were right, Miss Marple, he said. The knot, the earrings, the timing, you saw it all. But what about Clara's bandage? And Lyle, are we sure they're clear? Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts settling like petals after a storm. Clara's bandage, I believe, was a red herring, a simple injury, misdescribed in her fear and distress. She was no part of this, only a witness caught in the aftermath, her silence born of loyalty to her client and dread of scandal. As for Mr. Lyle, his role was exaggerated by gossip and Harold's suspicions. The letter, likely a professional note, became a catalyst in Harold's mind, but Lyle himself was no killer. His alibi, though imperfect, holds enough truth to clear him. The not Inspector was always Harold's signature, a relic of his past that betrayed him. Craddock jotted a final note, his expression thoughtful. We'll wrap up the loose ends, he said. Clara and Lily will give final statements, and we'll confirm Lyle's movements one last time. But it's done, thanks to you. You've a way of seeing the human heart, Miss Marple, that puts us all to shame. Miss Marple smiled faintly, rising with her basket. The heart, Inspector, is where all stories begin and end. I'm only glad to have helped weave this one to its close. She left the station and made her way to Clara's shop to offer reassurance and close the circle of the tragedy. The bell chimed softly as she entered, and Clara, at her work table, looked up with a mix of hope and apprehension. Lily was in the back, her soft humming audible through the workroom door. Miss Marple, Clara said, setting down her needle, is it true? They're saying Mr. Grayson confessed. It's true, Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. He admitted it. Clara killed her in a moment of jealousy, driven by doubts about Mr. Lyle. You're clear, my dear, and so is Lily. The shop can be yours again, without this shadow. Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for a handkerchief. Thank God, she said. I've been so afraid, Miss Marple, thinking they might blame me, or Lily. I kept quiet about her fears, and that bandage cut my hand on a wire, truly, but I was so nervous, I let people think it was something else. Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch light but warm. You've no need to explain, Clara. Fear makes us all stumble. But you told the truth when it mattered, and that's enough. Keep your shop, and let the village heal. Lily emerged from the workroom, her face brightening at the news. It's over, then, she asked, her voice trembling with relief. We can stay here, with Mrs. Henshaw. You can, Miss Marple said, smiling. You've a good heart, Lily, and a sharp eye. Stay with Clara, and you'll both do well. As she left the shop, Miss Marple passed the inn, where Vincent Lyle was loading his valise into his motor car. He caught her eye and tipped his hat, his smile as polished as ever. "Miss Marple," he called, "I hear the case is solved. Pity about Grayson, but I'm glad to be on my way." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze steady. "Safe travels, Mr. Lyle," she said, "and perhaps, in future, you'll be more careful with your cards." His smile faltered, but he said nothing, climbing into his car and driving off, a figure fading into the city's glitter. The village was settling into its afternoon lull, the tea room's windows steaming with the promise of lunch. Miss Marple decided to stop by to gauge the village's mood now that the truth was out. Miss Hartnell, polishing a teapot, greeted her with a knowing look. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," she said, pouring tea. "Grayson's confession is all anyone's talking about. They say he was mad with jealousy, thought his wife was running off with that art dealer." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes twinkling with quiet amusement. "Jealousy, Miss Hartnell, is a powerful force," she said. "But it's the small things, the knot, the earrings that tell the story. The village will talk, but it will forget in time." Miss Hartnell leaned forward, her voice dropping, and Clara. "They're saying she kept quiet about something, scared her out of her wits." Clara was frightened, Miss Marple said, "but she did right in the end. Let's leave her to her work and let the village heal." Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resumed at last. The click of her needles was a counterpoint to her thoughts, which lingered on Harold's confession, the tragedy of a love turned lethal. She thought of her garden, where a rose's beauty could hide a thorn that drew blood, and saw in Harold a man whose heart had been his own undoing. The truth, she knew, was like a rose's bloom hard won, its petals falling to reveal a core of pain. With a quiet resolve, she set her knitting aside, her mind at peace, the web of the case complete. St. Mary Mead would mend, as it always did, and she would watch, ever ready for the next thread to unravel. Chapter 12. The quiet of St. Mary Mead's the 9th day since Eleanor. Grayson's murder dawned over St. Mary Mead with a serene clarity. The sky a delicate wash of blue that softened the edges of the village's thatched roofs and cobblestone lanes. The tumult of the past week, Harold Grayson's confession, the unravelling of his jealousy-fueled crime, the quiet vindication of Clara Henshaw and Lily Bates, had settled into a hushed acceptance, as if the village, like a weary traveller, had found rest at last. Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour window with her knitting needles clicking softly, gazed out at the familiar scene, her mind reflective yet ever alert. The case was closed, the truth laid bare, but she knew that human nature, with its intricate knots of passion and folly, would always weave new mysteries in the tranquil folds of St. Mary Mead. Her cottage was a haven of order, its lace curtains framing a world where the smallest details, a glance, a hesitation, a misplaced earring, could unravel the deepest secrets. A ball of soft lavender wool rested in her lap, the rhythm of her needles a counterpoint to her thoughts, which lingered on the tragedy that had unfolded in Clara's shop. Harold's confession had been a stark revelation, a love twisted by doubt into a fatal act, and Miss Marple felt no triumph in its resolution, only a quiet sorrow for the lives it had shattered. Yet there was satisfaction, too, in seeing justice served. The threads of evidence, the knot, the earrings, the burned letter woven into a pattern that no deception could withstand. She rose, setting her knitting aside, and decided to take a morning walk, to gauge the village's mood now that the storm had passed. Her shawl draped lightly over her shoulders, she stepped out into the crisp air, her straw hat shielding her eyes from the sun's gentle glare. The village was alive with its usual rhythms. Sparrows chattered in the hedgerows, the milkman cart rattled along the lane, and the scent of fresh bread wafted from the bakery. Yet there was a subtle shift, a softening of voices, as if St. Mary Mead, chastened by its brush with violence, sought to reclaim its peace. Her first stop was the post office, where Miss Weatherby presided with her customary blend of efficiency and curiosity. The room was quieter than usual, the usual buzz of gossip subdued, though Miss Weatherby's eyes gleamed with interest as Miss Marple approached. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she said, stamping a letter with practiced vigour. "The village is talking of nothing but Mr. Grayson's confession. They say he was mad with jealousy, killed his wife over that art dealer. You had a hand in it, didn't you?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, adjusting her basket on her arm. "I only listened." "Miss Weatherby," she said, her voice mild, "the truth speaks for itself, if one pays attention. But tell me, how is the village faring? I imagine it's a relief to have the matter settled." Miss Weatherby nodded, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A relief, yes, though it's left us all a bit shaken. To think it happened here, in Clara's shop, but folks are glad it's over. Clara's been seen about, looking pale but determined, and young Lily she was at the church yesterday, lighting a candle. I suppose they're both trying to put it behind them." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her thoughts turning to Clara and Lily, whose lives had been touched by the tragedy's shadow. "They're strong, both of them," she said. "The village will help them heal, as it always does. And Mr. Lyle, has he left, I wonder?" "Oh, he's gone," Miss Weatherby said, sniffing. "Drove off yesterday in that fancy car of his. Good riddance, if you ask me. He brought nothing but trouble with his city ways and his charm. The village is better without him." Miss Marple inclined her head, her mind picturing Lyle's departure, his polished exterior intact but his role in the drama reduced to a footnote. She thanked Miss Weatherby and stepped outside, her steps turning toward Clara's shop, where she hoped to offer a final word of encouragement. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered, its note a gentle echo of the day's serenity. Clara was at her work table, pinning a length of emerald silk, her movements steady but her face still marked by the strain of the past week. Lily, sorting ribbons in the corner, looked up with a shy smile, her fair hair catching the light. "Miss Marple," Clara said, setting down her pins, "it's kind of you to come. I've been meaning to thank you for everything. They say Mr. Grayson confessed that it's all over." "It is," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair with her usual unassuming grace. "He admitted his guilt, driven by jealousy and doubt. You and Lily are free of any shadow, my dear. The shop is yours again, to fill with beauty as you always have." Clara's eyes glistened, and she reached for a handkerchief, her voice trembling. "I can't tell you what that means," she said. "I was so afraid, Miss Marple, thinking they might suspect me, or Lily. That bandage I made such a muddle of explaining it. It was just a cut from a wire, but I was so nervous, I let people think it was something else." Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch light but reassuring. "Fear makes us all stumble, Clara," she said. "But you told the truth when it mattered, and that's what counts. Your shop will thrive, and the village will forget in time." Lily approached, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Marple," she said. "I was scared to speak up about the earring and all, but you made it feel safe. I want to stay here. Help, Mrs. Henshaw. It's like starting fresh." Miss Marple smiled, her gaze warm. "You've a good heart, Lily, and a sharp eye. Stay with Clara, and you'll both do well. The village needs you, just as you need it." As she left the shop, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the village itself, a tapestry of lives interwoven with kindness and curiosity, strength and frailty. She decided to visit the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement's hospitality and gossip might offer a final perspective on the case's aftermath. The vicarage was a haven of roses and polished silver, and Mrs. Clement, arranging a vase of dahlias, welcomed Miss Marple with delight. "You've solved it, haven't you?" she said, pouring tea. "The whole village is talking of Mr. Grayson's confession. Jealousy, they say, over that Lyle fellow. Tell me, Miss Marple, how did you see it?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes twinkling with quiet amusement. "I only looked, my dear," she said. "The knot around poor Eleanor's throat, the earrings, the letter, they told their own story. Mr. Grayson's love was his undoing, poisoned by doubt. But the village will heal, as it always does." Mrs. Clement leaned forward, her voice dropping, and Clara, "I saw her at the church, looking like a weight had lifted. But there's talk about that bandage. Some said it was a burn, not a cut." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "A simple misunderstanding," she said. "Clara cut her hand on a wire, but her fear made her clumsy in explaining it. She's clear, and so is Lily. Let's leave them to their work, and let the village move on." Mrs. Clement sighed, offering a scone. "You're right, of course. But it's shaken us, Miss Marple, to think such a thing could happen here, in St. Mary Mead. It makes you wonder what else lies beneath the surface." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, her thoughts drifting to the countless dramas she'd witnessed in her quiet village. "Human nature, Mrs. Clement, is the same everywhere," she said. "It's complex and often painful, but it's also resilient. We mend, we learn, and we go on." Leaving the vicarage, Miss Marple decided to pass by Rose Cottage, now empty with Harold's arrest. The cottage stood silent, its curtains drawn, the climbing roses drooping as if in mourning. She paused at the gate, noting the untouched pile of leaves, a reminder of the life that had been uprooted. She thought of Eleanor, her elegance and her fear, and of Harold, whose love had turned to a knot that bound him to his crime. The cottage, she knew, would find new tenants, and the village would weave it back into its fabric, but the memory of this tragedy would linger. A quiet, cautionary tale. Her final stop was the tea room, where Miss Hartnell's sharp tongue and sharper ears offered a barometer of the village's pulse. The room was bustling, its tables filled with villagers eager to share their relief at the case's resolution. Miss Hartnell, pouring tea with practiced efficiency, beckoned Miss Marple to a corner table. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," she said, her eyes glinting. "Grayson's confession is the talk of the village. They say he was driven mad by that art dealer's letter. How did you know?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression one of polite curiosity. "I didn't know, Miss Hartnell," she said. "I only watched and listened. The knot, the earrings, the doubts, they pointed the way. Mr. Grayson's heart betrayed him, as hearts often do." Miss Hartnell leaned forward, her voice dropping, and Clara, "They're saying she kept quiet about Mrs. Grayson's fears, scared her witless. And that bandage, what was it, really?" "A cut, nothing more," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but firm. Clara was frightened, but she did right in the end. "Let's leave her to her shop and let the village heal. Miss Hartnell nodded, her curiosity satisfied for the moment. You're right, Miss Marple, but it's a shock, isn't it? To think such a thing could happen here. Makes you wonder what's next. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes distant. The village will go on, Miss Hartnell, she said. It always does. And we'll be here, watching, as we always are. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resumed at last. The click of her needles was a soothing rhythm, a counterpoint to her thoughts, which lingered on the quiet that had returned to Mary Mead. She thought of Harold, his confession, a final untying of the knot that had bound him to his crime, and of Eleanor, whose elegance had masked a life shadowed by fear. She thought of Clara and Lily reclaiming their shop, and of Vincent Lyle, whose charm had been a distraction but not a deception. The village, she knew, was a microcosm of the world, its lanes and cottages hiding the same passions and frailties as any city. She recalled a conversation with her nephew Raymond, who had once teased her about her knack for mysteries, calling her a gentle sleuth who saw what others missed. It's not sleuthing, dear, she'd told him, only noticing. People are so predictable, yet so terribly complex. She smiled now, her needles clicking, as her cat Tuppence blinked lazily from the hearth. The case was closed, the truth revealed, but Miss Marple's eyes remained alert, scanning the village beyond her window for the next ripple in its tranquil surface. The afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the garden, where her roses bloomed in defiant splendor. She thought of her garden as a metaphor for St. Mary Mead, a place of beauty, tended with care, but always at risk from weeds that crept in unseen. Harold's jealousy had been such a weed, choking the love that might have saved him. Yet the village, like her roses, would endure, its roots deep and resilient. As evening fell, Miss Marple set her knitting aside and rose to close the curtains, her movements unhurried. The village was quiet now, its lamps glowing softly, its secrets tucked away for another day. She thought of the tape measure, a tool of creation turned to destruction, and of the knot that had betrayed its maker. Human nature, she mused, was a puzzle she would never tire of solving, each case a new stitch in the fabric of her understanding. With a final glance at the darkening lane, she returned to her chair, her mind at peace but ever watchful. St. Mary Mead would mend, as it always did, and she would be there, her needles ready, her eyes sharp, to unravel the next mystery that stirred its quiet depths. The world, she knew, was full of roses and thorns, and she, with her quiet wisdom, would always find the balance between them.